Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm going to do a show on insects, apocalypse, and I'm going to kick it off with Serendipity Nuclear Lady. Just a little bit. We'll play, links are in the description. So a really important show tonight.
Driving late at night, running through my mind, serendipity, nuclear lady. A calm voice on a stage, measured in kind, keeps turning heavy questions
It's a
into
really
something
important
that
story.
sounds light.
The video.
She doesn't argue, she arranges the room, makes wrists feel distant with a practice tune. Not what happens, but how it's received, how to make you nod before you've believed. Then comes the pitch in a clean little frame. Women don't like nuclear, so women are the
Some hard
better
not to listen to the
educated,
whole
more
song.
resistant to the plan, so call it education, not persuasion. Rapid in empowerment, making feel brave.
What you should do is,
a flaw they can finally shave. I've heard that logic,
start playing
wherever
it.
power needs
Just
consent.
turn the volume down a bit as I intro the show. Links are in the description. It's worth listening to. A number of times, actually. I love a story and a song. Bob Dylan used to be the only person that really went down the long, hard road on that stuff. You can call in to 709, we're in Canada, 740-4076, 4076. It's at James Lucid on YouTube. Oh, it's up to 17,000 subscribers. My goodness. There is hope. Here we go. Let's get after this. This is complicated stories. And so what's happened now is the insect population has plummeted since 2011. Like, it's been going on for 80 years, since the nuclear industry started releasing huge amounts of anthropogenic isotopes into the environment through nuclear dumping, nuclear bombs, nuclear fuel pools, etc., etc. We might talk about that a little bit later. The last video I done kind of gives you a great insight into that. And the previous 8 videos of that were emaciated whales worldwide, 400,000 pound blue whales showing up at 25,000 pounds is normal now. We've never seen anything like this. But it's all species. So the food chain is broken in the ocean, but the food chain is broken on land. The food chain is broken on land. And we got a poll. Let me just touch on that for 1 second. Was the mass species die off? Because Japan was a pulse event, right? At the top of each of the reactor buildings were around 36 total reactor cores and 8 fuel pools at reactor 1, 2, 3, and 4. That fallout was significant. Well, not just significant. It was an event. It was a catastrophic event. And that's why the whales are showing up emaciated. But it's also why the insects are disappearing. And the insects are the keystone species for all the, for the mammals, animals. All of them are dependent upon that food chain working its way up. Was mass species die off as a result of Fukushima nuclear fallout contaminating the entire northern hemisphere? And Fukushima nuclear fallout contaminated the entire northern hemisphere is an actual headline itself. A story from, I think it was 2012. We've covered it many times. So this story tonight is insects and birds, because birds are very dependent upon insects. The majority, not all of them, some of them are seed eaters, obviously, right? You still find lots of seed eaters, but you won't find lots of insect eaters, and you're about to find out why if you're not familiar. I'll cover these stories. I'm just going to show you 3 of these headlines, 4 of these headlines, as we try to tell you that story of Fukushima. And Fukushima, what do you say, Dana? That's a conspiracy. You're talking about a major cover-up. Yeah, there is a major cover-up for sure. This is just some of the media pretending they're on top of Reactor 4. Why would the worldwide media put themselves in a position where they put videos out claiming they're on top of a building, and nobody in the media has challenged that assertion? That should terrify you, just that sentence on its own. Because in order for that story to work, all the medias worldwide had to participate in that lie. And the reason that lie was allowed to be perpetrated is because it's the catalyst of an extinction event that is playing out in increments. And now, a decade and a half later, the evidence, of course, is piling up and is horrific. And there's nothing else that fits in the equation, because this is post-Fukushima, and the effects of anthropogenic man-made radiation, if you're not familiar with it, you'll learn quite quickly as you watch these presentations. So large-scale bee deaths, was it Eisenhower or Einstein or somebody had said bees were gone within 4 years? Garden spiders are missing this fall, and that's how come now the year before that, I think it was it was that year, I was in the woods on a research expedition on the east coast of Canada after coming off the west coast of Canada, and the insects were missing. They weren't all gone, but as you'll understand coming up. So I had done a short video and I posted it. I woke up the next morning, my YouTube channel was gone. I think it was 24,800 subscribers I had. I had 1,500 of these types of presentations, plus my research expeditions were also there from 6 years, 4 to 5 months a year on the ocean doing species counts. So you really should take it to heart what I'm going to provide. I'm going to provide you with the documentation, unlike the industry. So it's the most difficult form of journalism there is. I have to prove all of my assertions, and I have a lot of assertions. I got to watch what I'm doing. I'm still not healthy yet. We just had a 2-day blizzard and still snowing out there, and that has busted me up, trying to keep the garden open, the driveway open. I'm busted up. Everything hurts. This story is so important. I wanted to do it last night, but there was no way I can get off at a bed. I was so busted up. Garden spiders are missing. So let me finish that facet. So I had reported on that when I woke up the next morning. Now I was in the woods, and there should be around 400,000 plus insects per acre. I couldn't find any. I was finding them on my house and other people's properties and buildings, and you would see webs to their vehicles, to their tires and stuff like that, from rocks, not from bushes. And the webs were always deformed. And so I was on a salmon river with my submergible, with my underwater drone, and there was nothing coming up there. And I had talked to Fisheries and Oceans that morning and the day before, and asked them how many was coming up from the coastline, because they have counters down there. They said nothing came up. He said, "Are you finding anything?" And I had the underwater drone there alongside of me at the time when he pulled up. And we had a great conversation about all kinds of other species that were missing. And there was So anyway, the spiders, in the summertime in the woods are a big nightmare if you're cutting through the woods. Anybody grew up in the woods. But anyway, they took down my site, my YouTube channel, and this is the result of, this is my new YouTube channel since then. Now, I had 24,800 subscribers on that site. They never gave me no warnings, no nothing. They just took my site down. And when I asked them why, they were extremely rude to me. And I think the finally got a reply. It took a long time, many months before I got a reply back, because I started pestering them. And he said, because you won't listen to us. And how can my research be an issue? I'm not some random idiot YouTuber out there crashing motorcycles and cars into trees for views. I'm not some attention-seeking moron. I'm actually cover very difficult topics with the documentation. Here we go. So anyway, garden spiders are missing this fall. What do you mean this fall? They're missing. All right, the way you frame stuff is really important. Grammar is a weapon. Experts believe starvation and weather caused the New Mexico bird deaths. So spiders are missing. They bioaccumulate radiation 1,000 times more than the insects do because they liquefy the insects. Large-scale death of bees. Where have all the insects gone? So there's an absurd amount of this stuff I'm going to get through tonight. And this is really important, too, because what eats insects is birds in particular. There's other, obviously, frogs and trout and all kinds of other species, dragonflies, whatever. But because we're very visual people, so we're more likely to see the birds than see those other species. Experts believe starvation and weather, and that's an interesting statement we'll get to. I got quite a bit on this. We covered this in 2020. It wasn't December the 4th. It was September the 16th, 2020. Weather caused New Mexico bird deaths. The biologists found shrunken breast muscles, kidney failures, empty stomachs, intestines, blood in the intestines, which is typical of radiation poisoning, by the way, because of the lesions to their organs. Blood in depleted fat restores, depleted. All evidence of starvation. That's a pretty interesting statement. But this is 2 months later. So by then they already know what's going down. So this story was meant to help downplay the event. It was 192 species, ultimately. This story recognizes there was 150 species of insect eaters on their migratory route. In the birds sent for necropsies, animal autopsies, biologists found shrunken breast muscles, kidney failures, empty stomachs, intestines. So, according to the news release from the State and Game Fish Department of government, evidence indicated the birds migrating through New Mexico were likely already starving when they entered the state. Now, you can't get into Mexico from Canada, right? Remember, that's kind of important for what they're going to say. Where they had trouble finding insects to eat after a cold front from Canada may have killed off prey. Insects have survived cold fronts, and Canada is known for cold. In fact, I just went to a brutal 2-day blizzard here. I might never get out of this place for another month till everything melts. There's so much snow out there. And it's that wet snow, and there's a lot of it, and so it's nasty. So first off, saying that, okay, let's say that did happen, that the insects were killed off on a cold front in Canada, which simply wasn't true, by the way. May have killed, and the word may is a conjecture, that's an opinion, clearly. But Canada is an absurd distance to Mexico. It's an absurd distance. Right, so that's throwing garbage into the conversation. Observers marked 150 species of birds found dead across western United States and Mexico. So if they ran out of food in Canada, that doesn't account for them. They won't make it to Mexico. And, allegedly there would be insects, according to that statement, and there would be insects in the United States and Mexico. So it's just one of these stories. just going to talk about, this one is just 2 or 3 of these. Fukushima spent fuel has 85 times more cesium than released at Chernobyl. It would destroy the world environment and our civilization, an issue of human rights, former UN advisor. It's not 85 times greater, it's 85,000 times greater than Chernobyl. And probably much worse than that. On top of that, you're talking about plutonium mixed oxide fuel was in that mixture, which is a high-grade, high-assay fuel of plutonium. And plutonium, kills all the animals and all the experiments with multiple tumors. Most of them will die as skeleton tumors. So the fledglings in the young species will be producing radioactive stem cells. Most likely won't survive the 20-day gestation. What's the word for it? The fledgling facet of their existence, right? Cesium-137 levels increased 10 million times after Fukushima. And we'll cover a little bit coming up a bit later here. This plume was only based on 9 days, by the way. And you can see Canada, United States is getting buried immediately. Now, when you extend that out, and we will, coming up to 30 days, the entire planet was buried actually in 20 days. At 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137 per cubic meter of air, according to that's the French government study, right? That the IRS and I smurfed up. Just bear with me. I know roughly where it was too. Okay. Right about here. Because the system I'm using is a complicated system. But it's really good for doing these stories, right? All right, this is important. Now, we talked about this quite a bit. I bring this up all the time about decomposition of foliage and litter in the forest, which is the biota and the bacteria and fungus. So the bacteria and the fungus produces the environment to break down the foliage and the litter from the forest, the dead creatures, and then the biota, 1 million microscopic animals that allowed that transition from matter, from plants and foliage and flora and fauna to be transposed into nutrients. That was wiped out in Chernobyl due to the radiation. And then we're seeing the same thing now worldwide due to Japan's Fukushima nuclear meltdown's effects, which I'll get more, maybe a little bit more in detail coming up. So global radioactive fallout was horrific and significant, and was isotopes already acknowledged and documented, extremely documented, as the IRSN has documented absurd 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air in Canada, United States. There's a cascade effect for that. That's going to break the food chain, both in the oceans, in your fresh water, and on your land, obviously, right? And then on top of that, rain and morning dew and everything else will move the stuff everywhere else. Eventually, it'll assimilate into every species in your ecosystem. This is what we see. Now, we had 80 years of this accumulation going on. 80 years. This stuff doesn't go away. And even, there's 10 decays to an isotope. The last decay will be to radioactive so-called lead. Now, they ignore that because it's not high. There's 1,000 isotopes, so it's not the first generation. It's just radioactive lead. But it's actually still producing energy every second. It still has a pulse almost at the speed of light every second. And when you're talking about enormous amounts, it takes, just a fraction of the releases most of the releases are still in catastrophic isotope forms. So the decomposition of wood and recycling of nutrients it contains are among the most important processes to take place in the forest. The speed at which dead wood decomposes and force depends on the climate as well as the fungi and the insects, the bacteria, the fungus, and the insects and the biota, actually. An international research team has now determined the annual contribution made by dead wood to the global carbon cycle, and more carbon is the recycling. Carbon is recycled into other insects and other microscopic animals and other foliage and trees and litter and pizzas and everything else. An international research team has now determined it's good. Carbon is good. And anybody tells you anything different is degenerate. And quantifying the importance of insects in the decomposition, so they're quantifying the importance just for this study so they can get paid, right? They get paid by their studies. And so they have to frame it, they have to go along with a narrative in order to get the funding, otherwise they're not going to get the funding. If they go against the industry, they won't get funding. Especially when the only people, you can't have dissenting voices. And originally we did, but now it's too important, you can't have it. The decomposition of wood and recycling, and this is unbelievably important because when you get rid of the biota, in the earth, in the soil, around the roots, the fungus, the bacteria, which is, we know happens, right? Because we have multiple studies on this stuff. Due to radioactive fallout, like the gammas, the alphas, neutrons, and betas. On top of that, they're pounding into each other. Each of them almost at the speed of light and producing X-rays. The Bremsstrahlung effect. The decomposition of wood and recycling of the nutrients it contains, including the carbon, are among the most important processes to take place in the forest, because that's how life recycles. And it can't just be nutrients, it has to be carbon. You can't have species without carbon. Higher levels of participation, and anybody who lives in that fantasy, get off my bloody site, moron. Well, the morons won't last this long into the video, unless they're degenerate morons from the nuclear industry, I suppose. Higher levels of participation accelerate the decomposition of warmer regions and slows it down in regions where the temperatures are lower, but they have less foliage and litter. So when you get rid of the foliage in the litter, or when you don't get rid of the foliage in the litter, when you don't have it breaking down, it becomes tinder dry. And because the biota is gone, the earth is sucking up heat instead of water. And we know this because on my research expeditions, I was going into a year-old ant's nest and just jamming my arm in there all over the place. There was no insects. And eventually they'll erode and it'll be like they never existed. Reduce colonization by soil invertebrates to irradiated decomposing wood in Chernobyl. Actually, that study here is important. Wood quality ambient radiation were used to test for deficient defenses against decomposers. Ambient radiation, ambient. Like, these are very slippery people, too. Again, grammar is weaponized against the mere mortals. Only the whack pro industry lapdogs let me get this sorted out. Abundance of soil invertebrates extracted with mustard powder decrease with ambient radiation. Mustard powder is also used, say, in clams. And you put a spoonful of mustard powder and a bowl of water with clams in it, and you put that in there. The clams will literally spit out all the sand in them. But that's the last species you want to be eating is shellfish, because they bioaccumulate radiation 125,000 times more than a fish does. I won't have to worry about any of them soon, along with the whales. Whales will probably be gone in less than 4 years, all of them. And if you look at my last 8 videos on whales, live stream, I never left any holes in my story, I can tell you that much, because the facts don't lie, see? So decrease with ambient radiation. There were more soil invertebrates under uncontaminated than contaminated wood. So contaminated is not ambient radiation, it's anthropogenic man-made radiation. ambient natural radiation, harmless, stupid, everyday background radiation that every species on the planet is already acclimated to through genetic superior selection, is not what we call contaminated, right? It's the ecosystem itself. And the industry has conflated anthropogenic and man-made, or anthropogenic and natural, anthropogenic, which is man-made, and natural stuff together, and that has left the entire population incapable of being able to analyze anthropogenic man-made radiation. And they're always finding other ways to make it even more insidious. There are more soil invertebrates under uncontaminated than contaminated wood. Soil is inhabited by a range of microbes, invertebrates, and vertebrates that disintegrate and decompose dead wood and leaf litter. So when you take that out of the equation, and the litter and the foliage and the species don't break down because you don't have the biota, you don't have the fungus, the bacteria, the biota because of the radioactive fodder to sterilize your woods, you can expect mass floods because the ground won't soak up the water. So flash floods should show up, and if it's distributed worldwide, then you would see that reflected post-Fukushima, and that's what we're seeing. And then also because the earth is not soaking up water, when you get lightning strikes, the fires now, you have this big foliage and litter wafting up and float 1,000 feet, and you got another forest fire, because that would normally never happen. And the ecosystem was designed, when it's perspired every morning, to dampen these hot spots out quicker. Now that doesn't happen, which is emblematic cause and effect of anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout. These communities can be disturbed by ionizing radiation. Well, it's about time you use that in natural radiation sources. No, natural radiation sources are harmless and innocuous and benign. We're already acclimated to it through genetic superior selection. It's completely dishonest and disingenuous, right, to conflate that together with anthropogenic man-made ionizing radiation. Or from radiation originating from nuclear accidents. So now they're saying natural so they're saying ionizing radiation is one source, natural is another, and radiation originating from nuclear accidents like Chernobyl, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island is another one. Our bodies don't have, and the species don't have, an immune trigger to defend against anthropogenic man-made radiation. So when it's in the species or humans or animals or whales or whatever, our bodies will attack it every second, the source, and try to build a tumor around it, a sarcophagus. What the body considers a sarcophagus is a tumor. And that's a response trigger to the fact that the anthropogenic isotope, which is incredibly small, is pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second. And your body recognizes it as a foreign object. It doesn't have a solution. Like you cut your finger, it sends out the white blood cells and repairs it. When you got anthropogenic man-made radiation in birds or mammals or animals or fledglings or baby this or baby that species, their immune systems are compromised. And because they're sending all these resources, not only to the source to encompass it, to put it in the sarcophagus, a tumor, but because that source is pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second in every direction. And that's wrecking chromosomes and DNA and cells and molecules and causing permanent lesions to organs and everything else. So the immune system is under siege trying to repair that every second and attacking the source every second. And it has to do that for the entire lifespan, right? And then there's so many different isotopes. The biggest byproduct, by the way, of the fuel, not only from Chernobyl but anywhere else, is a curium isotope. Curium isotope, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. Plutonium is named after the devil because all the species, all the dogs, for instance, the U.S. Navy studies, all of them dies from multiple tumors. And it's bone tumors are terrible, terrible, terrible way to die, and they're not given any relief because they're animals and they have no no attachment to animals. These scientists from the nuclear industry, they're literally bugs to them. And so a lot of these scientists, their children have pets. And can you imagine how cruel they can be to those pets when the kids are not around? Or from radiation originated from nuclear accidents such as those at Chernobyl. Well, Fukushima is 4 buildings with 8 fuel pools and lost the inventories from all of it, which is around 36 reactor cores. And each of the reactor cores is equal to about 100 Chernobyls. So 3,600 Chernobyls. And the reason being Chernobyl is a small reactor, it's a new reactor. It was a graphite reactor. It didn't have decades of reactor cores or any fuel pools at the top of the buildings. Japan's are massive reactors of pure uranium, pure plutonium. They have decades and decades of reactor cores, and there's about 5.5 reactor cores produced each decade per reactor. And because they don't have a repository, the majority of that is stored at the top of the buildings. There is a common spent fuel pool, which was right across the street. In Fukushima, the pictures of that were redacted. They were released with no explanation in the 10th year, in January the 10th year. Or from radiation originating from nuclear accidents, those at Chernobyl. Like 3 Mile Island don't even be... Now, 3 Mile Island was brutal. Don't get me wrong. But Fukushima is worse than all nuclear meltdowns combined by many orders of magnitudes, because you had massive reactor cores with decades of reactors also in the fuel pools at the top of the buildings. And the most... why would you build these reactors on the tectonic plates, within 70 kilometers of the tectonic plates, with a 3,000-year history of them causing massive tsunamis on top of that? And then the prevailing winds cover North America immediately, which was the food basket for a lot of the world. And 3 Mile Island. So it was meant to happen, clearly. Otherwise, you wouldn't have built it there. They weren't stupid. Okay. Nuclear accidents, Chernobyl, Fukushima use experimental manipulation of wood quality due to differences in exposures to ionizing anthropogenic man-made radiation among tree trunks and ambient radiation levels to the soil to test the hypothesis that radioactivity contaminated wood would result in a negative correlation between the abundance of soil invertebrates colonizing slices of woods and the level of radioactive contamination. So the more radiation, the less biota existed. So when they're talking about invertebrates, they're talking about biota. They're talking about 1 million microscopic animals that are breaking down the foliage in the litter, and the massive amount of species that are recycled, right? That carbon is recycled into other species, and you need carbon to have those species. Extract the soil invertebrates under decomposing wood using mustard power diluted in water. The abundance of the soil invertebrates extracted was highly repeatable at study session, decreased with increasing ambient radiation. Like, there's no such thing as an increasing ambient radiation that is natural. Right? Your body, so potassium, for instance, the industry loves to use that. Well, your body is homeostasis. Your body can only accumulate as much as your body typically is designed to hold, which is around 7,500 so-called becquerels. And what happens is, your body can't absorb anymore until it uses it up. It uses it up. You can't have anything without potassium. But the industry has conflated that with anthropogenic man-made isotopes, and you can't do that. You can't make a dirty bomb or a nuclear weapon or anything like this out of natural emitters like potassium, calcium, magnesium, iron, carbon. You can't actually call that isotopes, but they have. To the unsuspecting victims in Hollywood and schools and public schools and universities. The total dose measured with dosimeters 4 10-centimeter thick slices, 70-year-old Scots pines deposited 20 sites of vertebrates. Their colonization, their abundance was assessed annually during 2014-2017. So post-Fukushima, 3 years. So up to 6 years after Fukushima. The findings imply the abundance of soil animals colonizing wood slices were dependent on background radiation. So again, right, they're being very vague on what kind of background radiation has no adverse side effects. They're talking about contaminated woods, which is anthropogenic, versus non-contaminated wood, which is natural, stupid, everyday, harmless stuff. Radioactive contamination of wood, anthropogenic, man-made, obviously, but not to anybody who's reading this study, trying to understand it. And the interaction between contamination of wood and ambient radiation. Ambient radiation, natural, stupid, harmless, the insects can't live without it. So very dishonest to put that in that equation, but we're talking about Chernobyl studies, which are incredibly dishonest. In contrast, there are few studies investigating the effects of radiation on soil microorganisms. There are few studies, which is absurd to suggest there is. If you go back into my Chernobyl presentations for anniversaries, you go back to 2021, 2022 and stuff, and you'll see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies that I used showing absolutely unequivocally knows every facet of that stuff. On soil microorganisms and vertebrates, despite these play important roles in decomposition, hence in ecosystems functions. Like, to even, and they do this all the time, of course, to suggest that the document, they've studied every species, every facet of the ecosystem, from every angle, from every institution, from every country, have repeated the same studies, and they're locked. Most of them are locked up behind the paywalls of Elsevier, Springer, and Wiley's, which control around 20,000 journals. So the journals you read are most likely, you need $50,000 just to peruse the science at one journal that I can show you if I wanted to. So when you get to read it, it's going to be full of these misrepresentations and deceptions and deceit and dishonesty and disgusting parasites. So I'm just going to cover 4 or 5 of these pictures. This is we had done research expeditions for almost 6 years, 4 to 5 months a year, on the ocean from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. These were hard times, 4 to 5 months a year. And before and after pictures. Now, I was a commercial diver who anchored in many of these places for years. So to see the species disappear, this was post-Fukushima, after Japan's radioactive fallout. And this was noticed worldwide. But most people were pretty consumed by the tsunami, right? And the media was very liberal with that, and we're ignoring the nuclear for the most part. So the species to your left are exterminated. I went back for an extra 4 to 5 years, and the species didn't recover. And I'm not going to try to name all the species, even though I can name a vast majority of the species I'm alluding to. We repeated the studies year after year through great hardship. Very scary stuff. You got 27,000 islands, and you got several million islands just under the low tide line. So it's pretty easy to rip your motor off the back of the boat. And I worked the West Coast, open oceans, many, many times. Good times. There was nothing in the anchorages with me at night. There was no species on the shorelines looking at me at night. I have very powerful flashlights and spotlights on the boat, so I would flash everything up and scan the shorelines at low tide. In contrast, there were few studies investigating the effects of radiation on soil microorganisms. Simply not true. And because we got so much to get through tonight, I can't possibly challenge every lie, because that will take, as everybody is quite familiar around my site, it's a very long time. I can certainly challenge it. I have no problem providing documentation. And if you go to my playlist, in fact, let me rather than, because it's important that you know the difference of what I'm trying to tell you, show you. So if you go to my playlist, you're going to see there's some really good presentations there, what the major institutions done to you if you watch that playlist. Mass species die off of whales, birds, insects, caused by, And there's 50. I haven't got all the, and all my videos are not in that, by no means. So there's 63 videos of the die-offs. Right, so we're categorizing and cataloging, rather, and cataloging the species die-off for a long time, post-Fukushima. And my research has never stopped. I've been defunded. I don't have any funds that can keep the operation going full speed, but we have enough to keep the operation moving, barely. And a lot of this is done just one person in particular, or two people at best, helping, contributing, three people. So the industry has skinned me and isolated me. And so doing the research, field studies themselves are so important, but I'm old and busted up. It probably doesn't matter. I'm just going to keep working at having this conversation and telling this story before all this. Another couple of years, like 4 years' time, there will be no whales. From what we, if you go look at my playlist, you'll understand why I'm saying that. If you look at my last 8, 9 videos, you'll definitely understand it. You can't deny emaciated whales of every species worldwide any longer, for much longer. The industry will, right to the end. But in about 4 years, what's the industry going to do? They're ready for a revolution. You have drones will chase you around. They have robots will run you down to the ground. If they can't get at you, they'll send drone after drone until they blow a hole deep enough to get you. If decomposers are eliminated, Eric Schmidt's drone company that's making these suicide drones for Ukraine has a 70% kill ratio. And it's using AI and ChatGPT off Elon Musk's satellites to be even more hideous. So all you need is an internet connection. You can be anywhere on the planet and operate the drones. You don't have to be in Ukraine. You can be my next door neighbor and operate those drones here in Canada. And this ain't going to end good. The drone, we've just seen, the Chinese robots doing their annual celebration alongside the martial artists, and they're better than the martial artists. And today we've seen them show up all with the same program with AK-47 type weapons, doing target practice that there's no army can compete with these guys. Once they're intelligent enough to dig a hole in the mountain, seal it, go in there and build an army of 200 million robots with the natural elements in the mountain, and then come out of the mountain like a plague. The industry is insane, right? That's why they want the small modular reactor, so they can hide miles and miles on their Earth while they wipe out the planet. Once the species are gone, it's only going to be supermarkets left to feed you. And we're almost there now. If decomposers are eliminated or reduced in abundance by ionizing radiation, it can have a significant impact on the rate of disappearance of organic matter and hence the availability of nutrients for plants. Well, you can't just use nutrients. Plants can't survive, or insects or species, on just nutrients. They got to have carbon. I'm doing better than I thought I was, because my throat has been tickled for 2 days with out in working in a snowstorm like an idiot. I have shelter, right, for the plow and that, but it's still, my body's not ready for that kind of exposures. If decomposers are eliminated or reduced in abundance by ionizing radiation, it can have a significant impact on the rate of the disappearance of organic matter. And hence for the availability of nutrients for plants. And well, the species, the ecosystem is not recycling because of 80 years of emissions. And on top of this, we got 1,000 fuel pools worldwide. We got 1,000 fuel pools worldwide, each of them full of decades of reactor cores. that instead of, say, each fuel pool got 5 reactor cores, then each reactor core would normally split atoms, produce. These are perpetual machines. These fuel pools, right? The problem with the fuel is it becomes very fragile in the reactor because of the neutron and because of embrittlement, right? And reactors become the same reason from neutron bombardment. But what happens with the fuel is, if they keep it in the reactor, they're going to have an issue that they can't resolve, and so they take it out when it's only about 3%. So what they call 3% of they only got 3% of what the energy was there because you have to take it out. Now, because it went through a chain reaction, it doesn't stop splitting atoms because you took it out of the reactor and put it in a fuel pool, and now you have no containment. And so it's boiling off 120,000 liters in each fuel pool worldwide. There's 1,000 of them doing it. And so instead of splitting atoms, 5 reactor cores in a fuel pool splitting atoms for 5 million homes and businesses, imagine how many atoms it takes to boil a glass of water. That's more than a Google, which is a number, right? Just to boil a glass of water. Now, these anthropogenic man-made anthropogenic isotopes, there's no species on the planet with an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. So that being released into the environment at a continuous rate from 1,000 sources, not counting all the dumping they've done worldwide, and like Hanford they dumped so much in just a short period in Hanford. It was equal to, it was 450 billion gallons, but a lot of people, that doesn't resonate for them. So think of it this way. Think of a 6-foot wide aquarium of sludge that is 518 feet tall, wrapped around your entire planet more than once, dumped into the environment. And a majority of stuff is still splitting atoms. There's no outcome in the future for us because the anthropogenic man radioactive fallout will destroy every species, including the flora and the fauna, the insects, the trees, the plants, the plant matter. And this is some of the evidence that acknowledges that and helps build that puzzle, makes that equation much more easier. And we're still not even getting into the headlines yet until we get to that. Decomposition is an important ecological process that accounts for the recycling of organic matter. And it plays an important role in carbon and nutrient cycle. What's going on? I don't know. Nothing came through. Decomposition is an important ecological process that accounts for recycling of organic matter, and it plays an important role in carbon and nutrient cycling. So carbon is cycled along with nutrients. You can't have one without the other, because you can't produce matter without carbon. Carbon is matter, right? As a short way to appreciate the enormity, the importance, the wonderfulness, the beauty of carbon. If you know, carbon would look like the moon. 2014 performed a decomposition experiment using uncontaminated leaf litter from 4 species of trees that were deposited in litter bags at sites at Chernobyl, differing in levels of ambient radiation. Well, Chernobyl is not associated with ambient radiation per se, it's with man-made radiation. Right? That distinction should be quantified so that anybody who's reading this can extrapolate appropriately. The experiment showed that there was a clear evidence of reduced decomposition in areas with higher levels of ionizing radiation. So what a sneaky rat to frame it that way. And that was the case both for the decomposition due to microbial activity and decomposition due to soil invertebrates and vertebrates. So the invertebrates, you're talking about 1 million species. Hello, everybody. What's going on? Yeah, let's keep rolling here. Decomposition due to soil invertebrates and so higher rate, because like all of these sneaky studies they do, they show harm. They try to conflate it with natural stuff and so-called ambient radiation, and then anthropogenic, right, gets thrown, way after as another part of that equation, but they're not. The harm is happening from anthropogenic man-made isotopes that are created from the emissions and nuclear disease factors worldwide / nuclear power plants. You can't contain the emissions from the fuel pool. So, I mean, how can you have a future with fuel pools of reactor cores on your planet? You can't. You will ultimately end up in an extinction event. And unfortunately, we are here. Experiments showed there was clear evidence of reduced decomposition in areas with higher levels of anthropogenic man-made radiation, so-called ionized radiation. That was the case for decomposition due to microbial activity, decomposition due to soil invertebrates. We're getting through it. We're almost through it. Immediately following Chernobyl, the abundance, diversity, reproductive rates of soil invertebrates were markedly reduced in Chernobyl. So immediately after, there was a massive reduction in the biota. And this is a permanent effect. These effects were long-lasting. No, they're, like 1 million years. And geographically extensive. Well, everywhere that stuff shows up, you sterilize that environment. And it might take decades, right, for that to become finite to the point where there's nothing functional. We're seeing it much quicker because Japan was a pulse event of enormous amount of inventories. Disposition, radioactive fallout landed worldwide. But the effects clearly visible for many years after. No, it's sterilized. Right? It's dishonest to suggest that it's only many years. Right? You got to clarify these assertions because they're very important, right, to this story. Indeed, recent investigations of the abundance of invertebrates on the soil surface using pitfall traps reveal that there were depressed abundance of beetles, wasp insects, in the most contaminated area. The ionizing radiation may have effects that interspecific interaction and even communities of organisms. Right? So they slowly start to allude to some of this stuff. You don't tell you how far away they are. This could be in Ukraine. This could be in Belgium. This could be in Belarus. This could be in France. These were heavily contaminated after Chernobyl. They closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom after Chernobyl because of radioactive fallout. Now, they only acknowledged cesium on top of that. You can't contaminate something 3,000 miles away to that extent without contaminating all the water there too, by the way, and to contaminating Europe. In order, you got 3,000 kilometers. You got to go through Europe to get to United Kingdom. Reduced or even complete lack of decomposition has a strong effect on the accumulation of litter and wood, right? And because that's not breaking down, and because the biota, the fungus, the bacteria, the microscopic animals are not there, it doesn't soak up water. It's not able to retain water anymore. So it becomes tinder dry and becomes insulation for the ground, which is not soaking up water. It's not perspiring in each morning like it normally would through the normal cycle of life in your forest, in your meadows. And ultimately, when you get a lightning strike, what happens? As we know in Chernobyl, you have radioactive forest fire plumes covering thousands of square kilometers each year now. And so they become radioactive. Radioactive can make other things. The kind of emissions we're talking about is not just from splitting atoms, it's from atoms being, from cement and steel and rebar and water and everything else, perpetually ionizing and radiating that, atomizing, aerosoling, ionizing, radiating, and releasing that as particulates. So the fuel was particulated. So wherever that those small microscopic particulates are landing, they're splitting atoms. They are perpetual machines. And the emissions from them every second are attacking a species that has no autoimmune trigger to defend against it. So this snowball effect now, after 80 years, and a pulse event at Fukushima, and with 1,000 fuel pools worldwide doing the same thing, and then, like the Soviet Union, Russia has 18,000 dumps in the Arctic Ocean of nuclear, including full reactor cores, multiple reactors sunk there, and they've done studies where they say it'll be 1,000 years before the submarines will decay enough that some of the radiation will spill out. I mean, it's absurd to think that a ship on the bottom of the ocean is not going to be rust bucket in 3 years, let alone in 1,000. It's absurd. But they got the funding to do the study, to tell the lie, to wedge it and level it and utilize it and weaponize it against us. And this is our plan and not theirs. They're the evil. We're not. So this is super important. Reduced or even complete lack of decomposition has a strong effect on accumulation of litter and wood and cessations of forest in large areas of Chernobyl, had given rise to extensive accumulation of organic matter in forests. Indeed, there's a significant increase in the thickness of foliage in the litter from 4 centimeters non-contaminated control sites to 16, so 4 times as much litter accumulated, and I don't remember when that study was done. In fact, fires cause large amounts of radionuclides to be resuspended into the atmosphere because you can't destroy it and transport it away from Chernobyl, away from, it's transported worldwide immediately within 20 to 30 days. Potential negative impact on health of humans and other organisms. This is a blanket of death that you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't hear it, you can't feel it, you can't taste it, you can't touch it, you can't perceive it. It attacks everything with replicating cells until it annihilates their immune system, and by proxy then them or the species or whatever. 2 trees were from highly contaminated areas at 50 microsieverts. So 50 microsieverts are considered a highly contaminated area. We're in real trouble. So 20 becquerels a kilogram, and this study was considered highly contaminated. When was this study? Let me go backwards. Because this was a really important story for what I'm talking about tonight. 2021. No, right here. Oh, crap. I don't know. You'll have to look it up yourselves. Look, when your species disappear and nobody acknowledges it, right? When all your species are disappeared and nobody's acknowledging it, that is pretty strange. When all the media pretends that they're on top of a building that doesn't even exist, no universities are challenging them. None of the big shot medias are challenging them. None of the alternative medias is challenging. That's all you can do is show that picture and say, look at these scumbags. Look at these idiots. Look at these crazies. And you have now you can start a conversation. And by the way, that's reactor 4. That never happened. Officially, this is what it looks like. So, if you're not going to take me serious, then you're not rational. You're not being realistic. You're playing a game with your own brain that won't pan out and will come back to haunt you forever. Insect decline and emerging global environmental risk. October 2020. The Earth species seeming in an ongoing state of collapse. Insect decline could pose a global risk to key insect-mediated ecosystem functions and serves such as soil and freshwater functions, nutrient cycling, soil formation, decomposition, water purification. Oh, crap. That should be your response to that. Biological pest control, pollination services, and food web support that are all critical to the ecosystem functioning, human health and human survival. On top of that, so your existence, your loved ones, your friends, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren are dependent upon you whooping the nuclear industries, chicken neck arses. An international treaty, like I never wrapped that up, an international treaty for global pollinator stewardship and pollinator ecosystem restoration. How are you going to do that in a contaminated environment? You can't. It's not a natural environment. Needed to counteract the current crisis. You can't counteract because you won't acknowledge Fukushima or the nuclear industry is a culprit. So let me just go through about 20 of these because that'll give you a little better insight if you're not familiar. And even if you are familiar with this topic, that'll help reinforce. Those 3 studies I just showed you are inconceivably important to any conversation you're ever going to have for the rest of your life about this. And so after this, I recommend go over to my BitChute channel. There's a link in my description. Download YouTube's version. Wait for me to upload, wait for me to upload my version that I'm going to reformat and put that in your personal collection. It's really easy to download off BitChute. You don't have to sign in or nothing. Just click the download button under the video. It'll open up another window, stop the video, right-click on the video, and it'll give you an options. And you say download it, and it'll ask you where to download it. You can download the video. YouTube is messing with my videos. Don't download my videos from YouTube if you can avoid it. But don't hesitate to take screen captures of everything because that means you're very intelligent. If you're taking screen captures of everything I'm showing you, you're probably one of the smartest people on this planet, and people will say that to you in the near future when you start weaponizing this against the industry. I'm providing you with an unassailable, incontestably documented information for a purpose, because I'm not going to be around forever, and this information will, because I am relentless. And if I didn't get busted up a few weeks ago, it's the first time I've ever taken any time off in 15 years. And so just doing the show tonight was really hard for me. I did not want to get out of bed. I'm so busted up. It would destroy the world's environment and our civilization. So Fukushima spent fuel, saying it has 85 times more cesium is absurd, because each of the reactors in Japan are plutonium uranium, whereas Chernobyl was a graphite reactor. And then Fukushima's reactors are massive reactor cores, and there was around 36 reactor cores and 8 fuel pools. But they're still acknowledging the harm that even a fraction of it would destroy the world's environment and our civilization. So that's what that assertion they're doing right there is that a fraction of the reality of what was lost would destroy the world environment and our civilization. So if you're ever going to make, like, everybody out there that understands what I'm doing should be trying to master how to take little clips like this, these little 30-second, 1 minute, 2 minute clips, and make these clips and put another name. I don't have to put my name into it or nothing like that. Say, look at the wonderful bumblebees or whatever. And get that up on different sites. Nobody's doing that on this entire planet. How come? It's so easy for anybody to do that now. You can get screen capture, cheap software for $2 off your favorite app store. You can take a 3 minute, 1 minute, 30-second clip of this stuff, and you can start a conversation. There should be like thousands of people doing that. We would bully this industry within a year into non-existence. Right? There'd be lots of people. There'd be crimes against humanity for many of them. So a fraction of the reality of the inventories that were lost would destroy the environment, the entire planet. The worldwide oceans and ecosystems and fresh water and salt water would destroy it and our civilization, and becomes an issue of human survival. Tell me that's not important, that statement, that reality, that documentation, that information. Because you can't, right? I'm just going to show you a couple of pictures of the reactors, just so you can appreciate that cover-up a little bit. In case you've never been here, I have an obligation to always make sure that you get a different version of what you're going to hear anywhere else. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4 reactors, and at the top of each of the reactors were 2 fuel pools. And so were the reactor cores. And so each reactor building produces 5.5 reactor cores every decade. These are 3 decades plus. So you're talking about, being conservative, you're talking about 36 reactor cores stored at the top of 4 of the buildings. Now, at the top of the buildings, these were 150-foot buildings, 19-story buildings, 65-meter buildings. So that's Medusa reactor 3, the plutonium mixed oxide reactor. That's reactor 4. That doesn't even exist. Neither one of these, for instance. They're chopped off at the stumps, right? And the only reason I left them stumps there was put these contraptions around it. They don't physically touch the stumps because clearly the stumps ain't able to sustain any kind of weight, right? And then this is why the media, this is just a fraction. That's ABC Australia, by the way, Cecilia Vega, the biggest media in Australia. The biggest media in Europe, right over there. The biggest media in Canada, United States, CBS. And CNN was a worldwide free media meant to indoctrinate people with a military type of agendas. Like a globalist agendas, World Economic Forum, UN agendas. So the building to your left clearly doesn't exist. So why are they pretending they're on top of it? Concentrations of radiation that hit the United States and Canada, high concentrations. You can read that study yourself. Was rich in cesium-137 close to the surface. So the French government experts on nuclear radiation risk, the Ministries of Defense and the Environment and Industry Research, the IRSN itself, put out this study of 1 million, 10 million atoms. So this was a spike. It spiked. This wasn't an opinion or a conjecture. This wasn't a projection. This was a documentation. This was a spike, right? And you got to go read that study to appreciate that. Now, this is the model based on 30 days. Think of a snowstorm coming out of Japan. That's where it's emanating from after. This is Fukushima plume. So think of a snowstorm, you're at day 10. Think of this snowstorm, you're approaching day 20. And day 20 is coming up almost right there now. That's day 20. An invisible snowstorm covering the entire planet. You can't see it or anything. But it's an invisible snowstorm. So there's no species, no humans, no animals, no mammals, no invertebrates, no forests, no meadows. There's no whales, or there's no fresh waters, no phytoplankton survived intact that never got polluted and poisoned by this. And because the biggest animals on the planet, the whales, are eating the byproduct of the phytoplankton, right, the krill, and the phytoplankton itself, then they're bioaccumulating huge doses because the phytoplankton lives at the surface. It's even more insidious. And because shellfish are filter feeders, it's like a bowl of shellfish, mussels and clams and oysters and abalones and scallops or whatever, is very toxic because it bioaccumulates radiation 125,000 times more than the fish do because they're filter feeders. So there's cancer in a bowl. So all the radioactive fallout isotopes produced models like this. And the model shows you a symmetrical distribution of cesium-137, which pulses energy 600 feet every second per atom. So an invisible snowstorm, There's pulsing energy every second. If this was a snowstorm, think of a snowstorm where the snow never melts and never stops snowing, the snow never goes away, never stops coming out. I know I just repeated myself, but it's so urgent for you to take this studies from the French government serious. It's not just the French government. And Arnie Gunness and Helen Caldicott wants you to believe that the fuel pools are at the top of these buildings. So why they're put on a pedestal was to indoctrinate you and help cover up the stories. So we didn't need Arnie Gunness, and they didn't produce that study. Right? They interfered with that study by getting put on a pedestal. But the study was based on a very high concentrations of hot particles, including plutonium and americium. Well, this model is only based on 20 days. And this is Neptunium-239, which decays every 2.5 days by 50% to plutonium-239. And plutonium, my body is not really good here. I'm not doing that very good here tonight. But I'm determined to try to get through as much, if not all of this tonight, so let's keep after it. Because unfortunately, these stories are so complicated, these presentations are so incredibly complicated that you have to provide enormous amount of background and insight in order for everybody to be on the right page, which is the documentation, right? The documentation doesn't lie. The interpreters can make many mistakes, and it's absolutely normal. I'm trying to make sure that I imbue in everybody that ability not to get sucked into that idiot void by the differences and distinctions. The toxicity of inhaled plutonium dioxide in beagle dogs and puppies. It was 144 beagle dogs. This is Loveless Respiratory Research Institute, New Mexico. This is the United States Navy Institute. Calling it Loveless is pretty appropriate. Death from radiation occurred 1.5 to 5.4 years. The dogs, 144 beagle dogs that won't bite anybody, that are very loving animals. The most friendly animal you'll ever meet is a beagle dog. Down here, tons of people got beagle dogs for pets, and they just absolutely adore them because they're such beautiful personality. You can put them around children, they won't harm them. So scientists feel safe murdering them, see? Tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, and the liver occurred beginning about 3 years. So 3 different tumors. Bone tumors in 93 dogs, and 144 the most common cause of death, which is absurd. 93 out of 144 dogs died of brutal, catastrophic bone tumors, which mean if they're having any babies, they're producing radioactive stem cells for their entire development. And if it's a human, you're talking about 20 plus years. Not that the plutonium is going to go away for 250,000 years. And lung tumors and plutonium, of course, they won't live very long. Lung tumors found in 46 dogs, second most common cause of death, and liver tumors. Tumors in the 3 organs were competing causes of death, and the findings in the dogs suggest a similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans. We're exposed to the same radiation. Now, it turned out that it was discovered that human kidneys are at least, if not a lot more, 50, 60, 70 times less efficient than animal kidneys at removing plutonium. So again, right, the United States government's assertion, you see similar dose-related biological effects, was off by many, many, many orders of magnitude because the human are 50, 60, 70 times less efficient than the animal at removing the plutonium. So they're much more susceptible. Okay. We're talking about plutonium. Plutonium pulses enormous amounts of energy every second for 250,000 years. Now, the big problem is, now forget about the alpha for a second. Ignore alpha. Ignore betas and gammas and neutrons and everything. It's the major byproduct in the radioactive fuel. So if you live within 1,000 miles of a nuclear fuel pool, a reactor core, with fuel, if it's a couple of years old, it's going to have fuel in the pool with no containment. It's hemorrhaging curium isotopes. Not like, you've seen the study of the plutonium, or the americium, or the neptunium rather. You seen the study of the cesium-137. Well, the biggest byproduct of these plumes, and this is a pretty big quantified assertion by the French government, of 1 million to 10 million times increase of cesium-137. It pulses energy 600 feet, but it's got nothing. It's got nothing on curium. Curium is the biggest byproduct of radioactive fuel rods. And curium, it was discovered, required lead shielding 20 times thicker than plutonium, so its energy is 20 times more powerful than plutonium. Plutonium killed all the animals in all the studies. And we blanketed the entire planet with plutonium. And now this model is only based on a fraction of the inventories that were lost. Right? None of these inventories were included in any of the models you're going to see tonight. Or the fuel, not a single fuel pool is included in those models. So please, for goodness sakes, take serious what I'm just trying to help. Right? I'm compelled to try to do the right and moral and ethical thing. And just because I'm an asshole don't mean I'm not trying to do the right moral and ethical thing. I'm an asshole because the industry has so many goblins and disease parasites that I'm the result of that. I'm the result of years of research expeditions seeing an extinction event. I'm actually normally would be just a pretty easygoing, pretty fun person to be around, pretty normal person. And I had an incredible life when I was younger. I got hurt as a commercial diver. But I loved the ocean incredibly much because of the incredible universe that was there of species. It's really special. Now it's gone. In post-Fukushima, we've destroyed everything. And we're making a mistake by not acknowledging it and not challenging the industry and not bludgeoning the industry. The industry's gone to war against you. You have every right to respond appropriately, and appropriately is to go after them with everything in your soul. And I am weaponizing you with information. That's the best weapon we got, besides music. And we got that too. You'll find links in the description or in the chat room right now to a couple of incredible songs. U.S. states hit with extremely large peaks of Fukushima radioactive material. Significant amount of plutonium released for months. Holy jeez. For months. Well, let's look at what cesium will look like for just 30 days again. This is we're approaching 10 days right here. That's 10 days of releases. This is 20 days of releases is coming up in a few moments. Here's 20 days of releases of just cesium-137 at 1 million, 10 million atoms. Now, curium is the biggest byproduct, not plutonium, but plutonium, it tells the tale because we showed you those studies, right? If you go over and look up Dr. Raymond Gilmedy, for instance, in Loveless Respiratory Research Institute, they have several hundred of these studies. All the dogs die from multiple tumors. Okay. So measured globally, blanketed the entire northern hemisphere. Blanketed the entire northern hemisphere. So when I got that poll here tonight, contaminating the entire northern hemisphere, was the mass species die-off a result of Fukushima nuclear fallout contaminating the entire northern hemisphere? Fukushima plume model shows 1 million atoms. So when I talk, like for the layman's terms, it's better for me to describe this as atoms, anthropogenic man-made atoms, because the average person then doesn't get scared away, doesn't get, ghosted like the deer in the headlights of a car at night or something, right? They're able to absorb that and then, apply it appropriately. So anthropogenic man-made atom, and think of an atom as of any of the different isotopes. I think, like I've been told many times too, that it helped people absorb it. So West Coast, million square so a becquerel is a pulse of energy. So an atom explodes every second. It doesn't explode, it pulses energy every second, every direction. That's a becquerel. You need an isotope to make that happen, right? So rather than confusing the people, because we're trying to make this a friendly conversation so people can really, like, it's a terrible story, but it's the story. It's not, I didn't cause this. I'm not the result of this. I'm sorry. I didn't create nuclear. I don't promote nuclear. I didn't have nothing to do with Fukushima. Nothing to do with reactors. None of that, right? So I'm not the bad guy by providing. I dug up all the information, and we have an absurd amount. We have a silly, ridiculous amount of documentation. And the industry has been telling you for 80 years that it's harmless and it's like a banana or like a potato chip, the emissions, like walking in sunshine. None of that is worrisome to anybody. And right, so each generation of nuclear experts have promoted that banana and potato chip lies. Not very many of them are willing to say the word banana publicly anymore, because if I find it, I'm going to put them on blast, right? I'm going to ridicule them, and I might even use them for the rest of my life as an example of a scumbag. So Fukushima plume model showed 1 million atoms of xenon-133. Berkeley said there was no plume. Of course there was. Berkeley and MIT, if you go into my playlist I showed you earlier, the first study there, you'll see the responses. I challenged, I haven't got to Berkeley yet. Now, I've done this many times over the year, but they took down my site. So I have to do things over again. They're very difficult. So Harvard University, Stanford University, Yale, I can't remember. Let me just bring that up one more time. Excuse me. So yeah, audit of Harvard, MIT, and Stanford University. So that playlist, I challenged their official responses. And every time they told a lie, I went in and showed you the documentation, moved on to the next lie. And that took 3 to 4 hours to cover all their lies, and by providing you with the documentation for my assertions, right? They don't give you any documentation. They just stand there and, we're MIT or we're Harvard University, so you got to listen to us and shut up. Well, I don't play those games. And I've studied their materials for years. All the biggest shakers and movers. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Oxford, MIT, and all the other scumbags. I've been collecting and learning and documenting this for a very long time, for 25 years now. Rain with 20 million particles. Particles are different from your typical isotopes, see? These are created in the inferno, in the nuclear explosion. And these are capable of splitting, these are perpetual machines that are splitting atoms. So each particle is capable of splitting atoms forever and ever and ever. And I don't believe for a second it was iodine-131. That was put out there, right, to manipulate the population, because it was clearly, most likely, curium isotopes, which are the biggest byproduct of the radioactive fuel rod. That was a Canadian study. So was this one. This was an Ottawa study. The west coast of Canada was 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129. So 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129. Right, so the 129 isotope is in the form of the atom, 220 million atoms. So when you look at all these different isotopes, you're kind of saturating the thyroid glands and the bones of every species with absurd longevity, like gammas, betas, alphas, and neutrons. And you're creating this concoction, this elixir of poison in your system that you can't chelate out, that is going to be pulsing energy, even though it's like iodine-129 is a very faint, short, not I shouldn't use the word faint because it's still pulsing at the speed of light. It can't be in your body without being in proximities to chromosomes and cells and DNA, minimum, or organs. And so it's going to cause permanent damage every second to many. Well, in the context of how many is in your body, it's causing damage every second to a lot. Your body has to try to repair every one of them every second. And when you're talking about enormous amounts, an absurd amount, this is assimilating all the plants and trees, all the pollen. All the pollinators are being catastrophically, and they're bringing the pollen back to their hives, genetic superior hives, that are incredibly, now they're incapable of defending against this invisible enemy to everything with replicating cells. You're talking about the perfect weapon against a planet. This is the perfect weapon to use against the planet. And if you infest the planet with this plague of anthropogenic man-made isotopes, it'll eventually annihilate every species. And you can come back and get all the resources in 100 years or something. Cesium-137 plume forecast for North America and Europe up to March 24th to France's IRSN. The radiological protection, nuclear safety for France, for the French scumbag government. I showed that to you a little earlier, right? Weekends off at Fukushima. Well, I left a comment today on IDBM or whatever it is, the major movie site of the Fukushima 50. That showed up in my news feed, and I was very unpleasant when I seen it. So I said, well, I'll just write a review. I got a ticket for it, so it should get posted. I'll take the wind out of that sail, hopefully. Weekends off at Fukushima, not one plant worker could be seen. Operational equipment lay idle. A cold, eerie quiet. How are you going to work at a nuclear meltdown? How does that work? Your organs melt. It doesn't matter how stoic or brave or stupid you are. Your organs are going to melt. The homeless we're missing, really. Because the nuclear scientists, nuclear academics, nuclear companies are not working at Fukushima. Or you don't hear Bechtel at Fukushima. I hear Harvard University at Fukushima. You don't hear MIT at Fukushima. Because they're not going there. They're not going within 100 kilometers of it. Former top International Degenerate Agency official. Fukushima is a catastrophe for every citizen of the planet. Radiation doesn't recognize borders. For every species on the planet, for every molecule, for every insect, for every piece of pollen, for every biota. And it's permanent, it never goes away. It'll kill all the species and it'll be there for 1 million years, make sure they can never reestablish. How is this story not important? How does this story warrant me only getting 17 viewers? By the way, I got rid of the likes, even though it's still showing up. There will be no more likes on my site. There'll be no more comments on my video when my show is over. That's gone too. Because the industry is weaponizing that against you. I am, however, going to keep the live stream chat room running because I think everybody deserves an opportunity to ask a question. And so I do a lot of shows. I haven't lately because I got hurt, but I'm on my way back to normal. That's still weeks away, but I feel in my body. At least I can lay my elbow now on stuff and it doesn't hurt. It still gets aggravated after a little while, but at least it doesn't hurt. Because it used to hurt to put my arm down anywhere. And I always lean on my right arm, and so that's been madness. Was mass species die-off a result of Fukushima nuclear fallout contaminating the entire northern hemisphere? Well, yeah, of course it was. The industry covered it up. Tokyo, 240 kilometers away, at 500 trillion atoms a kilogram. 55 atoms is an evacuation zone pre-Fukushima. 500 trillion atoms is idiocracy. It's stupid. to be in that environment. We got 5 or 6 more to go, and then we'll get into these headlines, and that'll go pretty smooth because I'm not going to make that complicated because there's so much of this stuff. But it's important that you understand that facet that's about to come up, right? Trying to blame it on dams, trying to blame it on lights, trying to blame it on pesticides. It is true, but it's not, that only happens in a fraction of the landmass. So it's dishonest, right? It's dishonest to put that in that equation. Look at reactor 3. You ejected the reactor core and the fuel pools straight out of the building. And officially, that never happened. Officially, they got all the fuel out of the pools, and reactor cores are next. I mean, it ejected it. I'm not going to play the video for you today, but it's the same thing with the ocean. This study was based on 954 days, 200,013. This is a German recognized institution. Radiation data from Seattle may be withheld by the Feds for National Security. 450,000 times detection levels persisted for weeks. This is one of the plume models. These are based on 20 days. It's suggesting it didn't go to the southern hemisphere is absurd. How many insects does it take to feed a hungry baby bird? So this study was based on 61 nests. In just one small area was millions of insects for 21 days. I take it is to raise the fledglings so they can get out and catch insects. I found a number in the millions surprising. That's just the author of this story. A contributing writer. This is always suspect when you hear that stuff. It was my math, so a second effort definitely was needed. The answer was the same. Birds using 61 nests consumed 5 million insects. I think it was around 700 per baby a day. And there's multiple babies in a nest. 4 bird species, and the newly hatched birds were in a nest. And this was a 20-day cliff swallows. The chicks are in the nest for 20 days, give or take a day, before they're flying. Each of those birds can eat 720 insects per day. No insects, no birds. World Migratory Bird Day 2024. So, you're starting to see this crack, right, in everybody's future, every species' future, when you're seeing stuff like this. No insects, no birds. So just saying those words on its own is frightening, but actually implying this is what's happening, right? So this is not implying, this is a prediction. They're warning in a few years you won't have any birds. Today on the World Migratory Bird Day, we celebrate the essential role insects play in fueling the journeys of migratory birds across vast distances. We talked about this at the beginning a little bit. We're going to get into that coming up. Peak insect abundance coincides with the arrival of the traveling birds, the migratory birds. It's so interesting, right? They're like the whales where they might travel thousands and thousands of miles, and they know where to show up, because they've been doing this for millions of generations. And now it doesn't work. And so now they're panicking and going other areas, showing up in places they don't belong, severely emaciated. And given the critical role insects play as the foundation of the ecosystem, as well as an important food source for birds and other wildlife, their decline presents significant ecological challenges and jeopardizes the delicate balance of biodiversity. Food, soil, water, and how the extinction of insects would transform our planet. Food, soil, and water. So without insects, your food, your soil, and your water is now a weapon against you. Your body's not designed for those materials without the insect species role that they play. Losing these tiny creatures would have huge implications for life on Earth for every species. A bee covered in radioactive pollen. Gonna bring it back to his hive and fuck up his hive. Cut an apple in half and the white flesh reveals a cluster of black pips arranged in the shape of a star. It's a tiny constellation of seeds hidden in the fruit bowl, but it reveals an interlinked universe of pollinators, pollination in nature's abundance, a delicate system, and one that can easily be thrown off course. A delicate system that can be easily thrown off course. They're telling that story, but in a roundabout way. When the apple blossoms are pollinated, seeds pump out hormones, telling the plant to produce the right vitamins, minerals, and the rate of growth. These help formulate crunchiness, size, shape, and if you lose these pollinators, however, this fragile system becomes unbalanced. And if only 3 of the 4 of the seeds get pollinated, our apples might grow lopsided, or with no vitamins, or with no minerals, or the nutritional value may decrease, as could, not might decrease, it will decrease, as could the shelf life of the fruit, turning it brown and wrinkles before its time. But it denigrates much worse than that. You're talking about an extinction event. It's not just pollinators. The story of the apple is one being told over and over across the world. A new report warns 2 million species at risk of extinction, twice as many as is previously estimated by UN. UN is dictating everything in your life, and they're the worst thing that could ever happen to your life or any other life on this planet. They're the Achilles heel of humanity and all the species. They have no right to exist. They're not a regulatory agency. They don't have any authority over any country, but they have co-opted 195 countries, and the politicians are being paid huge amounts of money to do things that are not. There should be a referendum for the country to make a decision instead of a politician with a handshake behind a closed door. Often it is animals such as insects, the species we tend to care the least about, which provides the greatest service to human population, pollinating crops, helping avoid healthy soils and controlling pests. I was actually going to name my show tonight, the presentation, if you hate insects, good news, they'll all be gone in a couple of years. And I was like, I think I need to tell it a different way, because I think this story warrants immediate, urgent, sustained opposition to the medias, the universities, and the nuclear industry for their incredible, untenable betrayal. Often it's animals like insects, the species, which provides the greatest service to human populations, pollinating crops, providing healthy soil, controlling pests, filtering your waters. So in the past 50 years, post-nuclear industry, wildlife population decreased by 70% on average. We can trace the decline of all the species in the oceans, freshwater, in the atmosphere, on planet Earth, in the biosphere itself, to the nuclear testing. And then if you look at the accumulation of 1,000 fuel pools splitting atoms into your environment now for 80 years, and if you're being honest about the effects of that, you can get where this is going to end up in the next couple of years. And their losses are already affecting how human societies operate and sustain themselves. It's already affecting it. Yes, it is. So if you look at the nuclear weapons testing, think about 540,000 kilotons. This number here is representation of kilotons. So the 15,000 tons, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bomb was a 15 kiloton. So in kilotons, 540,849 kilotons divided by 15 is 36,000 Nagasaki bombs of radioactive fallout. But radioactive fallout is not just from nuclear bombs, right? There's 1,000 fuel pools full of decades of reactor cores splitting atoms forever, and none of them have any containment. They purposely left this They have no choice. If you put, like, the nuclear fuel, the splitting of the atoms also produces some bizarre, very highly flammable effects, explosive effects. So you'll displace oxygen, you replace it with hydrogen. And then if you introduce oxygen in, you'll detonate, and you'll have this stuff show up everywhere. A lot of the Russian submarines, and British, of course, never had a way of decommissioning them, and so they were locked in. And so if you introduce oxygen in there or water in there, they'll detonate. So it's a very slippery slope what we got done to ourselves. Now there's no way to turn back. So 15 kilotons, this is the kind of damage we're talking about from 15 kilotons. But the radioactive fallout is very deceptive. When you look at the cloud, yes, it's enormous, but that's very deceptive because that will ultimately, within 20 to 30 days, become a plume that covers the entire planet, where everything is attacked from that plume. So it's very hard to comprehend Fukushima, because Fukushima's plume is a plume of particulates, and each particulate is splitting atoms. So this replicates itself over and over and over and over. The explosion has that same kind of effect, by the way, but not as intense as a Fukushima pulse event. So just one of the Soviet Union bombs, now they said 333 times more powerful than the Hiroshima. It was actually around 4,000 times more. 50 megatons is a lowball estimate. It was actually much bigger than that. And so just one bomb can be equal to 4,000 Nagasaki bombs worth of radioactive fallout. There's a better way to think about that. And that's why you'll see the decline of the species, because our planet would be amazing if the nuclear industry didn't exist. It'd be incredible. You can go to any coastline and you would see hundreds or thousands of whales every summer on a migratory route. You go to any pond and be full of life and birds, and it'd be amazing. We were a soup of life. Like the ocean, a glass of water would have 1 billion creatures in it. And 75 to 100 million of them was the phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestering chain. And the rest of it was the microscopic animals, the larvae, the small fries, the eggs, the milk from the sperm of all the starfish and shellfish and sponges and all this. Just we've only explored a fraction of the ocean. We've now destroyed it through an industry that was intent on doing it in the first place. It was intent on hiding, and still is, by mocking you for your whole life, saying it's like a banana and a potato chip, and walking in sunshine and climbing a mountain and sleeping next to somebody. All of these people should lose their degrees, because and the universities that allowed it to happen should be replaced. Everybody in these universities should be replaced so we can restore some kind of function, to come up with some kind of solution. The people that we have now institutionalized, right, that are embedded by the industry, right, they're so entrenched into, but we can break that cycle of abuse, of contempt and of hatred and annihilation of our wonderful species. We are the only generation that will get this opportunity. And we are just a couple of years away from losing total control. It's now or never, and now is the only option you got. And the reason that people like you and me exist is to do this stuff. That is our calling. We were, our whole life led up to this moment, to go to war, and we can win the war. It's a war of information, and we have the upper hand. We have facts and documentation and truth, and we have field studies to back everything up with. We are not going in. We are the best armed generation that ever existed. We are destined. This is our destiny. We will uproot this industry. We will hold it accountable. We will prosecute these people through the appropriate ways. Southwest bird die-off caused by long-term starvation. This was 192 species total. New report finds the majority of the birds found dead in early fall were emaciated. They starved to death. was talking to an extremely educated guy recently, and when I said all the whales were emaciated, he asked me what did emaciation means. And I get that a lot, right? And it's okay. To me, I'm so used to that, right? That's how I describe it, because that's what's going on. They have no muscle mass, they have no fat. They're emaciated. But I'm always a little surprised when I come across really educated people with major college degrees don't know what the word emaciation means. It confuses me. It is what it is, but it confuses me. Dead birds specimens. There was 192 species of insect-eating birds found over a huge migratory path that had starved to death. The die-off was caused by long-term starvation, exacerbated by of cold weather. Now, we covered that. Like, you can't have birds in Canada and saying the ones showed up in Mexico starved to death because they could have ate in between that, right? It's dishonest to do that, and that's what they done there, though. Hundreds of thousands of birds. It turns out to be over 1 million. 192 species of migratory insect-eating birds all starved to death. This is now undeniable. Scientists arrived that starvation is most likely cause of death in the majority of the birds they examined. I'm getting uncomfortable. Based on depleted fat deposits, empty stomachs, small amount of blood, kidney failure, shrunken flying muscles. Southwest bird die-off has seen the involvement of 192 species, including various migratory birds like warblers, swallows, flycatchers. The die-off has been attributed to a combination of factors. So they like severe drought, wildfire, unseasoned cold snaps. That simply doesn't work. Because if those are happening in isolated areas, the birds can still migrate past those areas and then start eating again, right? But when they travel, and they're trying to conflate it with a cold snap in Canada, which just lasted a couple of days. The species are well equipped to handle that. The genetic superior selection, right, has made them that way. Emaciation is a result of starvation. Hundreds of dead birds as massive die-off sweeps western states. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of birds have been lost over the last month. Just feather and bones, not much muscles at all. The yellow-rumped waddler. The fact that the die-off was happening before the cold snap is a disturbing sign. Right, and they said they were emaciated before they got to those states where the fires were going on, right? We started seeing this before the weather event happened. That in itself is troubling. We started to see it before the weather event happened. So blaming it on the weather is dishonest and deceptive and deceitful and disingenuous. Many carcasses have little remaining fat reserve, muscle mass, and birds were appearing to have nosedived into the ground mid-flight. They died in desperation. A bird might fly 5,000 miles from Canada to Costa Rica. A mass death event for birds. I got a few of these headlines of this same story we got to get through. Because that story is really important because you're talking about 192 species. And it took quite a while of researching to gather up the documentation from the observers, from the academics that were a mass death event. So not a, what's the name for a bird wreck? Because normally this is not called a mass death event, it's called a bird wreck. We didn't see that connotation a single time, did we? Over an extended period of time, too. A mass death event for birds in the American Southwest sounds like 2020. Well, this was September 17, 2020. So, yeah, that was the day after the story broke. Dead migratory birds, which include species, warblers, bluebirds, sparrows, blackbirds, western wood pewee, flycatchers, well, they're all insect eaters, are also being found in Colorado, Texas, Mexico. Unprecedented bird mysteriously dropping dead across southwestern United States. The dead birds include various insect-eating birds such as sparrows, blackbirds, warbler, blue, several species. Scientists can't figure what's behind New Mexico's mass bird kills. They can't figure out a proper cover-up story is more like it. Because you're not in 2020, Fukushima is in the kill mode after 9 years, right? It's in extermination mode at this stage. We have noticed the majority of species collected are insectivores and long-distance migrants such as swallows, etc., etc. Researchers are puzzling, why do thousands of dead birds fall from the sky? Like, I have a lot of contempt for the word researcher and scientist. After 25 years, I have zero respect for these people. They're very dishonest. The birds fly from the tundra landscape, like in Alaska and Canada, to winter in areas in central South America during the winter. To get there, the birds cross the American Southwest. On the way, they have to land every few days to rest and strengthen themselves / eat. Birds are dropping dead in New Mexico, potentially in the hundreds of thousands. Scientists are investigating why so many birds. Every time you hear that, you'll never hear any results. Oh, we're investigating it. And then years later, you're looking for the results, you still don't see it. Very rarely will you find it. You know, when it came to the mass mammal die-offs for a number of years for post-Fukushima, they were trying to blame everything, all the mass species bird die-offs. So there was a million common mers, 1.4 million common mers, and a million Cassini auklets. And so the common mers, they dive 600 feet all day long. 600 feet. 600 feet. All day long. And they feed on anchovies and squid and krill. And krill's like a shrimp the size of my thumb that can live up to 10 years. So krill and anchovies and sardines and squid, small animals. And if they can't find it at 600 feet, and then the Cassini auklets are microscopic eaters. They eat the phytoplankton, the zooplankton, the microscopic. They're skimmers. Right? They're little tiny birds. Beautiful. They're a beautiful bird. So when you have two different spectrums of the food chain showing up emaciated at the same time. Now, we've seen the same thing happen on the East Coast. That was on the West Coast, from British Columbia to Alaska. I was actually out doing research expeditions for months at a time while that was happening. Unprecedented bird mysteriously dropping dead across the southwest USA. So now you're talking about 192 species of insect-eating birds, and not hundreds of thousands, was not a million, but millions. And so they're gone. There was 46 million migratory birds on the east coast of Canada that disappeared less than 5 years ago. They didn't go somewhere else. They just disappeared, and everybody said, well, I don't know. Everything looks good to me. They are extremely emaciated, which is the biggest mass migratory species of seabirds are gone on the east coast, on top of this. This back to the insect eaters. They have no fat reserves, barely any muscle mass. They flied until they dropped, nosedived into the ground. And various insect-eating birds, and they just dropped dead in mass numbers. When you're seeing this many number of dead birds out in the wild, right, in accessible areas, what's landing in areas that are not accessible, right? The majority of the forest is not accessible, right? This is absurd numbers we're talking about. Like, this is groups of them dropping at the one time from starvation in the migratory route. It is terribly frightening. We've never seen anything like it. And they're losing millions of migratory, not probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions. The reason the word millions is invoked because you're finding catches like this, which are unprecedented. This is just, this is not even the horror movies perceive something like this. And again, right, they're pointing at insects experiencing huge population declines, and then to have a traumatic event like this is devastating. So they're acknowledging there's already a population annihilation going on. But this is symmetrical through all species. 192 species. Hundreds of thousands, not millions. Again, you see these connotations. New Mexico sees massive migratory bird deaths. Dying in numerous locations in the Dana Ana counties, Jessamine, Plebo, Roswell, other locations statewide. So this was symmetrical across many, many states. They weren't finding food in any of the states. You can't conflate this. You can't conflate this with bird flu or anything else. Darlene, you sent me that one already today. Exact word for word, so that your phone might have a app that is. People have been reporting the birds look sleepy. They're just really lethargic. Look sleepy. They're emaciated. They starved to death. On the other hand, numerous migratory species are dying rapidly, and it's not immediately clear why. Of course it is. You just don't want to tell you. They're extremely emaciated. No fat reserve, no muscle mass. They've been flying until they couldn't fly anymore. It's been suggested that millions of birds have died. I've seen it suggested that millions of birds have died. Yeah, post-Fukushima. Experts believe starvation and weather caused the bird deaths. This is December the 4th. When it was clear, we knew what happened. It wasn't the weather. Shrunken breast muscles, kidney failures, empty stomachs, and intestines. Bloods in the intestines, depleted fat stores, all evidence of starvation. 150 species. The numbers were actually 192, and that was asserted within 2 weeks. This story is a couple of months later, and they're only talking about 150. And then they're suggesting weather when that's completely dishonest. Thousands of birds starved to death this fall in the United States South. People across the U.S. Southwest were finding an astounding number of dead birds littered along roads, golf courses, in their driveways. Suggests that starvation was the cause of the mass die-off August, September. 80% of the carcasses showed signs of starvation. 80%. I'm sure it was 100%. What if it wasn't, what did the other ones die of? The researchers analyzed show signs of starvation, emaciation. Right, they got to put a big fucking turd in the punch bowl every time, don't they? Right, the editors are the ones that has the final say, right? They should have edited that out. Instead, they edited that in there. We expect to see more of this in the future. Yeah, that's a fact. Long-term starvation. To see this many individuals and species dying is a tragedy. And species. We haven't counted all the species, but there's a lot of species involved. So dead owls? Really? Warblers, hummingbirds, loons. The owls are usually feeding on species that are eating insects. Hummingbirds weren't finding. Hummingbirds were starving to death. Nectar eaters were starving to death. Loons. A loon don't eat insects. He eats fish, right? He's not finding fish in the freshwater ponds. Woodpeckers. Oh, man, wow. Representing the wide diversity of the migratory birds heading southward to their wintering ground. That's incredible. Reports have mentioned 192 species. Starvation, poor body conditions, necropsies found many birds were emaciated. Not many, all of them were emaciated. The other ones, if they weren't, what did the other ones die of, see? So if they didn't say the other ones died of this or died of that, it's because they were all emaciated. They had all starved to death. indicating long-term food shortage as a primary factor. But then if many birds were emaciated, how did the other ones die? What like when you have migratory birds, they're either all eating or they're all not eating, right? When it comes to these kind of events, so you have to keep it in perspective. Mysterious sudden mass die-offs in the United States could be killing millions of birds. I'm surprised they didn't try to say it was the boogie woogie virus or something. As far as researchers can tell, just because that's what kind of scumbags they are, right? As far as the scumbags can tell, it seems that only migratory species are affected. That's an interesting statement. I don't know if I believe that one. But local residents, which are they're not succumbing to the event, so I think what they're talking about is the seed eaters, right? And just framing it that way to get a seed of doubt. The birds seem to be in relatively good condition, except they're extremely emaciated. In other words, there was no kinds of diseases, manifestations. No fat reserves, no muscle mass. Flop until you drop. They migrate at night, get up in the jet stream, and they might migrate for 3 nights in succession, then come down and they'll feed like crazy, put on more fat and go again. They're traveling in the jet stream, they're covering territories pretty good. 192 species. Hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions, have died across at least 5 U.S. states, and then 4 Mexican states. It's enormous. We haven't counted all the species, but there's a lot of species involved. And so we're at 2 hours. We're going to just keep going here until we get through this. Died across at least 5 U.S. states. Such an important show. And because I've been busted up, and it's hard for me to do shows recently, I need something out there to complement the whale die-off that we've been covering. And like, I got so much emaciated whales to get through. It is mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. Let's keep it rolling there. Oh. So if you go over to my video, go over to Environmentalist Dana Durnford, I got 1,780 subscribers for the last 4 months. So you see the video up there revisiting the die-off there. So epidemic of whales, you may say, watch that one. Watch this one. This one, and this one. They're really important. Those 3, these 3, and those 2. And this one will give you context on Fukushima big time, so you can better appreciate. Look at these emaciated whales in my thumbnails. That is unbelievable what you're looking at there. Like, that is unbelievable. That every species of whales is shown up in severe emaciation. They don't even look like that one over there, right by my arrow, my mouse, and where you see, is a blue whale. That should weigh. Just let me bring that up pretty quick for you, actually. Where are we going to jump? I did all that. Okay. Let me stop here for 1 second. I'll show you those pictures of the whales. Like, you have no idea how much emaciated whales we haven't covered yet. It's going to take weeks to get through them. I got that much gathered up. It's absurd. It's no longer deniable. This is an absurd. This is the most heartbreaking. I've been at this a long time. This is the most heartbreaking. This is going to be the most heartbreaking year we've ever seen for everybody now. We are watching our planet be a snuff movie. What am I looking for? Okay, hang on. I'm a little bit out of practice, so here we go. It's madness. The story is madness. Hang on. All right. Just going to get out of the way here. And I'm going to go through these thumbnails for each show. Look at the emaciation levels we're talking about. This is a mass starvation event of all the whales worldwide. You're not supposed to be able to see the shoulder blades ever. You're not supposed to be able to see the rib cage ever. You're not supposed to be able to see the spine sticking up in the air ever. These should be really symmetrical, round animals. The blue whale up in the top right-hand corner maybe weighs 25 or 30 pounds or 30,000 pounds because there's only skeletons left. So it's just bones. They have a lot of bones, obviously, right? And they're big. You know, this is a 100-foot animal. I think that one's 90 foot. So 90 feet of skin and bones weighs around 30,000 pounds. It should weigh 300 to 400,000 pounds. Gray whales, bronze whale. Look at the emaciated bronze whale. Holy shit, eh? There's another emaciated blue whale. The humpback whales, there was 6,000 acknowledged had starved to death in 2015. And every whale we've seen since has been starved to death. There's another emaciated blue whale up there. That picture up there is a bronze whale that should weigh close to 90,000 pounds. It might weigh 1,800 pounds. Say 2,800 pounds of skin and just bone. I've never seen, the only reason that the animal lived that long, the only way it can wash up on the beach would be alive. If that died at sea, it sank. And look at the back part of this whale. It looks like a snake, right? We've never seen anything like this. There's a better picture of that bronze whale up in that corner. Gray whales, we have over 7,000 of them died in one area, in one period. There's 14,000 died post-Fukushima out of the 27,000. There's 13,000 left. But look how emaciated the animal actually is. Look at the back part of the animal. It's absurd. It's just the bones and skin. And that's bloating for the upper part of the body. That's the organs. If there was no organs, then that whale would be completely deflated, right? But look at the spinal column in this humpback whale. And the rib cages. Like, this is not how an animal's supposed to look. It's supposed to be beautiful, symmetrically. Lots of blubber, 12 inches of blubber. There's no blubber. There's no muscle mass. There's no fat reserve whatsoever. And we're seeing this symmetrical through all species worldwide. These are both bronze whales. Well, look how bad this one. This was in India about 3 months ago. This was about a month ago. And a blue whale should weigh, like, if you were stood on the other side of it, I could probably see at least your knees. And this animal's supposed to be 400,000 pounds. You should be hit away on the other side of it. There's nothing but a skeleton left, right? I've never seen, and they came ashore alive. And the same thing with these whales here. Like, the head is supposed to be beautiful symmetricals, right? You're looking at the shoulder blades, you're looking at all the bone structures, there's no muscle, there's no fat, there's nothing left there. They're like those migratory birds. They consumed all of their body fat and mass and everything else. And then, because whales are suspended in the ocean, that stuff haunts me now. Every night I'm haunted by that stuff. Where did all the insects go? Now, in 2014, we done research expeditions on insects also. And we covered some pretty famous areas, like Cathedral Grove in Vancouver Island, for instance. And it's about 70 kilometers of old-growth cedar. So trees are like 300-400 feet tall everywhere. You can drive through the trees in your truck because nothing grows on the floor because the trees block out all the sunlight, right? Even in a rain, thunder, and lightning storm, you can go into the forest for shelter because the rain won't hit the ground there. It's crazy. No insects. And we've done a study on both sides where all tourists in their great big Winnebagos would come through this big tropical rainforest, and when they come out the other side, these big, beautiful, $250,000 motorhomes had literally no insect splatters in the front of them. And so then we started expanding that research every day after that, and we never stopped. So where did all the insects go? That's 2020. In Germany, that records an astounding 76% drop in the total biomass. Total 76% drop in total biomass of flying insects. Hundreds of dead young tree swallows raise concern in southeast New Brunswick, Canada. 1/4 of the nesting boxes in the area contain dead young birds. The fledglings never made it out of the nest. They had starved to death. Died before they can leave the nest. But we've seen that show up everywhere else too. It was a bit of a shock, he said. What he found wasn't good news. Dead young birds. He found dead birds in 67 of 257 boxes. I'd never seen it before. Last year, out of 250, they didn't have any dead young birds. And these are, the success rate of survival was 30%, is what they figure. The only thing they can pinpoint as a possible cause is starvation, insects. So it's not just the southwest of the United States, it's Canada. Tree swallows eat flying insects using their phenomenal agility and reflexes to catch bugs in midair. I mean, each fledgling needs at least 700 insects each day. Cell phone radiation could be killing insects. Yeah, of course it is. But you can't blame that on the extinction event, on starvation events worldwide. But it's definitely an issue, right? I'm not saying it's not. In fact, on my other site that they took down when we found out there was no spiders in our forest, radiation from mobile phones could have contributed to a dramatic decline in insect population seen in much of Europe in recent years. Well, a lot of Europe is not heavily populated. You can't blame cell phones on everything, right? And then, when prime real estate for insects is insects are something like this would happen, then that population is replaced pretty quick if you have a healthy population everywhere else. On top of the pesticides, habitat loss, increased exposure to electromagnetic radiation probably having a negative impact on you. So they're like, yes, pesticides are real, but they're not going to be causing a starvation event. Of the 83 studies deemed scientifically relevant, 72 showed radiation has a negative effect on bees, wasps, and flies. Absolutely, I agree wholeheartedly that that's true. I'm not downing that. I'm just saying all of these, we're seeing this mass die-off of species are post-Fukushima, not post-cell phones, right? Cell phones have been around for a lot longer than that. A radioactive isotope is showing up in honey. Of course it is. And they're trying to conflate it with weapons fallout and stuff like that. Right? The relic of atomic bomb testing. Really? You think Fukushima didn't have an effect on all the pollen? Really? Dishonest, right? These people are dishonest. The world is hurtling towards an ecological disaster of bees and worms. Bees and worms. People don't really think about how important the worms are. Like the Pacific coastline of British Columbia has 480 species of saltwater worms on top of that, not counting on the 27,000 islands, which were no insects, no birds, no sounds. Crops will be increasingly difficult to grow at a time when the population is soaring. The world is headed for an talk about humans. Well, after the COVID, we're going to worry about that population soaring anymore. Usually population of all species soar because of threats. So if you like, a lot of the species will start reproducing at a higher rate because the species feel there's a threat to starvation or whatever, right? So they'll produce more babies. And the reason that our planet is exploding is because we've been under siege now, post-nuclear industry. The world is heading for an ecological disaster so serious. The number of bees, worms, and other species providing food production services to pollinators and soil health declining at alarming rates. And we won't survive as a species or as civilization unless nature and basic ecological processes are functioning. Well, we got to get rid of the nuclear industry at all costs before anything else can happen, right? If bee declines, what comes next? Tasmania researchers look at native insects as pollinators. Yeah, they look at it, but that doesn't mean that's going to be... They can't expect the native population to fulfill the pollinators, right? The moths, the bees, the butterflies. And the slim hope for monarch butterflies population holds steady this season, but there's a catastrophic decline. The count last year was an all-time low of 86% below 2017 and 2018. So population was 14% of what it was before. They lost 86%. What a slick way to make that difficult for the average person to comprehend, right? Insect population collapse. New evidence links it to dams. Like the whole world is not full of dams. And that's what I mean. This industry is just revolting how they misrepresent the reality. Insects are experiencing steep, widespread decline across the world. Well, that's true, but we don't have dams everywhere around the world, right? You can't blame that. The potential consequences of the decline is so dire it needs to be dubbed the insect apocalypse. Yeah, no kidding. Banning all pesticide in UK gardens to save the bees and the insects. Well, no. I mean, you got to ban it, yes, but you can't say that pesticides are the reason they're disappearing. Pesticides have been around for decades before Fukushima. So all this stuff post-Fukushima, right, the alleged harm that they're pointing out has been around long before that. So why didn't it happen before? Why has it happened post-Fukushima only? Our flying friends and foe do not seem to be as plentiful as before. When holidaying friends from Belfast arrive in Mayo, they once needed to wipe the windscreen, clean up dead moths and other insects gathered under vehicles. Now a well-worn signal of extinction. The wind has been swept clean too. The wind has been swept clean too. So the wind is not depositing insects on vehicles anymore, is one way he framed it. You're not allowed to come out and say there's something happened in 2011, because that's when this manifested, right? In the recent heat wave, we left every window open at night to trap the slightest breeze, inviting all sorts of winged invasions, and nothing came in. Sorry to bug you, but insects are in decline, 2021. Well, it's worse than that now, I can tell you that. Pollinators are in dire strait while harmful invasive insects seem to be proliferating because you don't have any predators, right? In recent years, scientists have begun sounding the alarm on a suspected insect apocalypse. Well, in 2013, 2014, we used to have truckers driving across Canada, United States, calling into the show during the live stream and saying, I thought you were full of shit. So I've been on the road for 3,000 miles. I'm listening to you, so I'm pulled over. I'm going to call you. I'm going to walk out to the front of my truck, and I'm going to tell you what I see, Dana. I don't believe you. And they get in front of the truck, and they're like, crap. You can hear the cars going by on the highway, like, there's nothing there, Dana. Insects are suffering steep declines globally in both diversity and abundance. Well, the whole nuclear age, 80 years, we've seen this trend, right? Downtrend of all species. But when you realistically, right, account for the emissions from all the dumping, all the accidents, all the fuel pools, all the stuff they covered up. Just the dumping alone is absurd. What all the world has done is absurd. It's absolutely untenable. Insect recycle nutrients to keep pests in balance, disperse seeds, pollinators, and soil improving insects also make irreplaceable contributions to agricultural productions. Light pollution from street lamps linked to insect loss. It's true. It's 100% true. You can't blame that, though, on the rest, because you can see the dark in the background. So, yeah, you might get the insects in this area, but as soon as you get a quarter mile away, everything is back to normal. So everything is, because you're open, if you do manage to cause insect loss in these little areas, which, they're big areas, I guess, in long distance, that's prime real estate, right? There's no doubt that cars were killing insects. Look, when you just look at the front bumper, Dad used to pour Pepsi or Coca-Cola on the windshield because that was the only thing to get the insects off it. Ugh. Scientists say light pollution may be contributing, maybe, which is a conjecture. That's an opinion. That's not worthy of printing. Deadwood in the global carbon cycle. So we covered that at the beginning, the importance of insects and decomposition of wood. The forests and the meadows are not breaking down anymore because we wiped out the biota. Now, I covered that extensively at the beginning with multiple academic studies, right, to make sure there was no way to misinterpret why we're seeing flash floods and forest fires raging out of control, because we destroyed the habitat that would normally control that. The biota, the bacteria, the fungus. And we've done it with radioactive foliar. Higher levels of precipitation accelerate the decomposition. We covered all of that, so I'm going to just move on. Insect life suffering in Switzerland. Swiss trees are stunted by climate change / lack of insects, lack of bacteria, lack of fungus in their roots. Although trees are starting to grow earlier in this year due to rising temperatures, they're producing less wood overall than 10 years ago. Oh, ain't that interesting? 10 years after Fukushima, the trees are not producing the same inventories. Although trees are starting to grow earlier, there's not rising temperatures. We had forest fires here last year in March, of all times, when it's supposed to be wet and miserable and everything else. The earth is so tender dry. We had forest fires where there's still snow on the ground, because the ground is not sucking up water, right? There's nothing there to hold it there. Worldwide decline in quantity and diversity of insects in the light of land use and climate. They got to put the word climate in there or they can't get any funding, right? Urbanization, farming drives insect decline despite benefits from warmer temperatures. Like farming has been around since the age of time. Urbanization too. Like the majority of land mass is still nature with no nature in it. Worldwide, the quantity and diversity of insects are declining. The insect apocalypse is more nuanced than it first appears. Insect apocalypse. You don't need any other words, right? Ecological Armageddon as a pillar of the food web crumbles. So there's lots and lots of documentation, not assertion, but documentation that backs up that the plummeting insect numbers signal an imminent, well, I mean, my goodness, right? We're collapse of nature. Nature's collapsing. And we're seeing the same thing with the whales, right? In recent years, scientists have reported alarming declines of insect populations. It is a crash of both sheer volume and the number of species. A crash of volume and species. Disappear in the next few decades. It won't be around in a decade, let alone in a few. A web over the highways to protect insects. A web over the highways. So the cars are not crashing into them, right? Which is a good idea because you got an extinction event, but it's not going to change the equation because you refuse to acknowledge what's going on, which is radioactive fallout. Where have all the insects gone? That's the words of a good song now, unfortunately. Large-scale bee death sparks fear over insects' health. Garden spiders are missing. You can't bring them back to your yard. And the reason that we only find them tying on to houses and structures is because the plants are sucking up radiation through the roots. Right? And radiation goes to the tips of the plants, and that's where the spiders try to tie onto, and they can perceive the radiation, I guess is what has to be going on. All the spider webs we're seeing, that's where we're finding them on man-made structures or on rocks. You're not finding them in the meadows, the forests, the trees, and you're not finding them. And so the ones we are finding on houses and that, the webs are deformed, and that there's no mass in the webs, which is typically how you would check out an area. You would check spider webs to see which species are in that area, right? And the webs we're seeing are completely deformed, and that there might be one or two insects in it. And they're setting up the webs wherever your people's porch lights are too. So they have to wait for nighttime to get something to accidentally come up into that light. But as we know through my research expeditions, the spiders are missing from the forest, and we know that the ones that are living on the house, you got to think about that statement of how many insects does it take to feed 61 nests with over 5 million insects to raise their fledglings for 20 days. So if you got a spider on your house, then the question is, that's easy for the birds to grab onto and bring it back to their fledglings. They can spot that from a long way away, and they don't. Because the ones we're seeing, the little birds we are seeing are seed eaters, not insect eaters. The majority of them have been wiped out. And for the last 5 years in particular, I've seen that pattern with no exceptions. They're there from spring all the way till winter. The insects or the spiders are, but they're not on the trees, they're not on the bushes, not on plants, that's how they catch insects. They go into the trees, bushes, and plants, and that's where the insects are hanging out, and they catch some of them, right? And I remember we were on that research expedition a few years back and had 2 alleged teachers showed up. And I was on a salmon river campsite, right? And I was doing the whole area. There was around 30,000 flowers there. There was no bees. Anyway, I came back for lunch. And, I had the quad, right? We're camping. I'm camping. And these 2 teachers shows up. They're crossing Newfoundland on train tracks. It's around 800 miles of train tracks through nature, right? Their tracks are torn up and you go right across the interior of the province. And they said, when I told them I was looking for spiders, I was just going to see their reaction. They said, well, I didn't know any spiders lived in the forest. And I said to myself, well, you're not teachers now, are you? And what an interesting statement to say to someone like me, right? Where do they live? Where did they live before there was houses? in the forest data. It was such a bizarre statement to me, though. Insect decimation upstages global warming. Global warming is caused by 80 years of emissions from the nuclear industry. You have an invisible plume covering the planet, pulsing energy at the speed of light every second, attacking everything with replicating cells. That's global warming. An alarming loss of insects will likely take down humanity. This is an incredible statement. The Paris Accord is riding the wrong horses. Global warming is a long-term project compared to insects catastrophe happening right now. The worldwide loss of insects is simply staggering, 75 to 90%, and happening faster. It is possible that some insect species may already be close to total extinction. Oh no, it's not possible, it's a fact. To go extinct over thousands of millions of years is one thing, but the current rate is off the chart and scary. Well, less than 15 years. We're seeing undeniable in every facet of the ecosystem post-Fukushima. For proof, how many insect splats do people clean off their windshields nowadays? Not many. At high altitude, you are still getting some, I noticed. But it's just a couple of certain species. It's not a diversity, right? He said, ours is the first ever pesticide-based agricultural society. An experiment is going dead wrong all of a sudden. So they're trying to say that all the insects throughout the Mother Nature are dying because they're using pesticides on farms, right? It's a completely dishonest assertion. So I've been wondering for the last few years, the last couple of years, not the last couple of decades, last millennium, a few years, why some of the insects have been dropping off. This year's really taking the cake with a lack of insects. It lets me dumbfounded. You can't figure out what's going on. That's because you refuse to accept or acknowledge stuff like Fukushima. Once you got an acknowledge, and this is only a fraction of the emissions in that model, based on 20 days. If that was a snowstorm covering the whole planet, you would say to yourself, well, holy crap, what's going on? The whole planet got a snowstorm? But if you got a snowstorm or radioactive fallout, for the average person, they're incapable of critical thinking. It's deprogrammed out of them through the idiot box. So multiple researchers all related similar experiences. Around the world, researchers widely acknowledge the problem of insect decline, but are at a loss to explain it. Well, it's easy to explain. You saturated the entire planet. You saturated the planet. Saturated every organism, every plant, every tree branch, every tree leaf, every flower, an anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout that never goes away. As cesium-137 only, I mean, you think about all the other isotopes we're talking about, 90% of the animal kingdom consists of invertebrates, insects, crabs, lobsters, clams, octopuses, jellyfish, worms. I know, as I showed you earlier, my research expeditions, the west coast of British Columbia to Alaska wiped out. And that's going to be symmetrical. You can't just have that area. We know for a fact now that it's all the way past New Mexico, the same attributes, right? Widespread public knowledge is simply not there. What's causing the sharp decline in insects and why it matters? Well, what's causing it is clear. It's documented. It's radioactive fallout. The fact that you refuse to acknowledge it means you're a threat to the future of humanity. Where have all the insects gone? German nature reserves point to a dramatic decline in insect biomass. They call it the windshield phenomenon. If you talk to people who have a gut feeling, they remember how insects used to smash on your windscreen. After Fukushima, it wasn't long before that disappeared, was it? Man-made rune adds 7,000 species to the endangered red list. From the canopies of the tropical forests to the ocean floors. So much worse than that, right? All the species are under catastrophic assault, right? All the species are. Same as me, I got 12 viewers, really. I know I've only been around for 25 years, but come on, man. Are my shows that bad? What can I do, I wonder, to get more people to watch my shows? 12 people. So they don't want anybody, there's only 12 people watching that. I'm not watching that. Because people are fucking stupid. And then the people that are sense-making, can you imagine how stupid in real life they actually are? They told so many lies to their families, right? They can't quantify the fact that they're pieces of shit. Can't justify it. Right? They dig themselves a hole, and the hole gets deeper and deeper, and then everybody starts shitting in the hole. And that's what these people should be done to these people. They should be prosecuted and put in a big hole, and everybody, all the toilets should flush right down in that hole till they're gone. Was mass species die-off a result of the Fukushima nuclear fallout contaminating the entire northern... Well, it wasn't just the northern hemisphere. As I showed you many times, right? Case of the vanishing ferns in British Columbia. From bugs to dolphins, rising temperatures have major effects on the global ecosystem. I got a few of these pictures I took myself last time out. A series of alarming new studies and reports published over the past week looks at the galloping impact of climate change in Canada and around the globe. Climate change, I gotta get you. Which is radioactive fallout for 80 years. Carbon doesn't pulse energy at the speed of light every second for millions of years. Carbon means more birds, more insects, more plants, more trees, more puppies, more life. Saying that carbon is climate change is like saying every time you put a can upside down on a shelf, a ship flips over somewhere and everybody drowns. It's ludicrous. It's stupid to even suggest that carbon is an issue. Canada's climate says Canada's warming twice as fast as the rest of the world. Canada took a big dump of radioactive fallout, continuous too now. We took a huge radioactive fallout amount from Japan. It was massive. A massive continuous plume covering us. Everything that landed on the west side of the Rockies came down also through Canada too. Not everything, but a huge percentage of it came down through Canada down to the St. Lawrence, right? Canada, the Canadians, is pro-nuclear beyond anything you can imagine. Massive insect decline could have a catastrophic environmental impact, says the study. Report author calls for a radical immediate action. See, and you can't have the action because you won't acknowledge what the issue is. Massive decline in insects could lead to catastrophic collapse of nature. Not could, that's where it's gone, we're there. We're just a couple of years away now from not being able to deny it. And, their biggest desperate move was recent over the last couple of years was to try to blame the accelerated mass species die-off on avian flu. Right? They're trying to they'll be saying the trees are dying from bird flu in the near future, because that's the only thing they got that they put out. The United Nations put out as a public reply to the species, and they kind of just kept their mouth shut. No one wants to commit, right? Nobody wants to say something to be locked into it. They're hoping somebody will come up with a magic potion to explain away the species. Well, what are you going to do in a couple of years when all the whales are gone, all the insects are gone? How are you going to explain that away? You can't just keep saying tin cans, pop bottles, and cardboard is causing mass species to starve to death worldwide. That narrative is not going to work much longer. It's not even working now, certainly, but in a couple of years, that narrative is going to blow up in their face permanently. They're just idiots, and evil idiots at that. That's what the nuclear industry is perpetual evil, leading to a catastrophic collapse in nature's ecosystem. A new study is warned, according to the first scientific review, first global. Like, we've been doing this long before they even opened their freaking pie holes. So, right, so your media job is to take a story and then explain it away, right? Because and you can't point fingers at anything in the industry. So it's got to be you. It's got to be your carbon fucking footprint. It can't be theirs. It can't be the military-industrial complex's carbon footprint. It can't be... They found that the insect decline, not just a local phenomenon. Really, good for you, you morons. Our work revealed dramatic rates of decline may lead to an extinction in the next few decades. Now, you hear that same narrative over and over and over. That's not a coincidence. That's UN at work, right? 8 times faster than that of birds. So insects' rate of extinction is 8 times faster than that of mammals, birds, and reptiles. Don't worry. That'll even itself out somewhere in the next year or two. We are at end stages. This is end times. We're living now. We're watching end times. I got 8 video presentations in my live streams. Out of my last 9 videos, 8 of them are on emaciated whales. And it's absurd. Of every species worldwide, it's absurd. And I have at least 10 shows left to go like that. And I have so many bookmarks that I haven't screen captured that is going to lead to absurd amount more. It's this flood that I don't know how to explain it. It's absurd. But I tell you what, it's lit a fire under me. I want nothing better to do than fight for you and your planet. And like, it's not a very pleasant job, because I got a big fucking target on my forehead, on the back of my head, every second of every day for the rest of my life. I mean, they've already destroyed me, but I can't be destroyed because I'm reality, right? I'm not some pundit or something like that, right? I provide the documentation. That's what makes me different than all the academics and scientists. And I provide an overwhelming, an unprecedented amount of documentation, right? They can all draw the same sources as I do, but they won't. So when I accumulate all of this stuff, and then you sit there and you tell that story in a show like this, along with, the introduction, first 40 minutes or something of just laying out the foundation to the nuclear industries. The reason the nuclear industry is the catalyst. We're almost here. There's not too much longer. Bear with us. It's worth your time, trust me. The horrifying thing is, you're not going to hear this story anywhere else on the planet. You're not going to see this information accumulation anywhere else on the planet. The decline in insect populations will especially affect the birds, the reptiles, the amphibians, and the fish that eat insects. If this food source is taken away, all these animals starve to death. That is nightmare fact that we are now coexisting, in that we are living in a moment of history that should never exist, only exists because of UN and its policies of promoting the worst entity, the worst poison on the planet, and calling it clean, green, and too cheap to meter and carbon free, with the help of 195 countries that have been hoodwinking their populations for a military-industrial complex, and an evil, insidious complex at that. Plummeting insect numbers threaten collapse of nature. The rate of insect extinction is 8 times faster than mammals, birds, and reptiles, but they'll fall at the one time. When the food disappears, they all go extinct too. And so we're on the precipice of a major extinction event. Completion. We're just a couple of years away from completion. Now is the time to rally the planet. Now the time is to take back your planet, what's left of it, and to fight and try to have a future for our planet and any species that we can salvage. It is the utmost urgency that we go to war against this industry. We do it through the information. And now is our time, right? This is our moment in history where we have to take the most difficult path and the most stoic path that any human has ever taken, and make a stand against evil that has no right to exist, and entire legacy and history is predicated upon deceit and dishonesty and deception. The world's insects are hurtling down the path to extinction, threatening a global collapse of nature's ecosystem. Period. That's not an opinion. That's a fact. The planet is at the start. No. It's almost at the completion of the 6th mass extinction in our history. That's an interesting statement. With huge losses already reported in large animals that are easy to study. Why didn't you include it? Why did you just give us this vague description when you're just writing, you can put another sentence there and articulate it. But no, you're too much of a fucking worm. A fucking piece of shit. That's, like, septic tanks are for people like this. This is what they should be fucking put into for their sentence. But insects are by far the most varied and abundant animals, essentially the proper functioning of all ecosystems as food for other creatures, pollinators, and recyclers of nutrients. And notice how they forgot to put the word carbon there? And kiss that good boy. Insect decline and emerging global environmental risk. 2020. We already covered that one. George Mambia. Why Fukushima made me stop worrying and love nuclear power. What a piece of shit that guy turned out to be. What a horrific bunch of creeps like this actually exist on our planet. What a horrific betrayal they are. Global insect decline may see a plague of pests. So the pests, the keystone species like mosquitoes. Because when you take all the predators away, this keystone species that would feed all these predators and insects and frogs and fish and flying and birds and used to foster fledglings and everything else, they're going to be prolific, right? Because they produce enormous amount of babies each year, the mosquitoes. And so while the other species are being wiped out because they're not so prolific, you'll see when you see a whole bunch of species and you don't see any predators feeding on them, I'm absolutely busted up here. I can barely stay here. This is good. We're finished, basically. Holy shit, we're almost 3 hours. Well, like, you can't ignore radioactive fallout and expect the problem to go away. I got a tendency after 2 hours to start getting irritated by these lies, and I start getting pretty vocal. That's not necessarily a good thing when you're trying to have a conversation. Radioactive materials like cesium, which is not the biggest byproduct, which is actually curium. Curium, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. Plutonium, as I just showed you earlier, kills all the animals from multiple tumors. Fucking Christ. I'm not even looking to see. Was I half hit away that time or something? Who cares? It's probably a good thing. So, radioactive isotopes are brought back to the surface each year by plant growth and pollinators. And so whenever you see the word just cesium, and you see big medias like New York Times, that's the most dishonest thing you can do, is just mention the word cesium when there's so many other isotopes. Major U.S. paper, time to quit nuclear power altogether. Nuclear power. Because the fuel pools threaten the very existence of human civilization as we know it. Nuclear power generation is the only invention that may destroy the future of every species. Not me. Nuclear power, not nuclear bombs. Nuclear power generation. UN Committee, we wouldn't expect to see any adverse effects in health or workers or anyone else. Really, with 36 reactor cores meltdown. Japan Times column, as the public, possibly worldwide, and all the species sicken over time, the truth will come out about Fukushima. Garden spiders are missing. All the species are missing. Fukushima is a catastrophe for all species. So this is an interesting study where they said 20 million particles of radioactive iodine per liter represents a significant level of radioactivity, which is typically measured in microcuries. A high level of radioactivity which could pose health risks. Now we're talking about 20 million particles, but you got to realize for every iodine-131 produced, for instance, there's 10 times more iodine-133, 30 times more iodine-132, 31 times more iodine-129 in that same liter, which unfortunately for us we can quantify, right, with documentation. Oh, we only got 4 more clicks to go. No way. I made it. I did not think I was getting through this show tonight. But when I came in the studio, I didn't recognize the studio. The studio looked weird because I'm used to doing 5 shows a week, every week. I'm brutal. I got a brutal regiment. I push this stuff out there as much as I possibly can stand it. But I got busted up on a set of steps a few weeks ago, and that really made me realize how old and broken I actually am and how fragile I actually am. I haven't been healthy since I was 35, right? I got hurt in a diving accident. So the fact that I'm even doing 1 show a week is a miracle. The world has no concept of how much work it takes me to do all of this and how unhealthy I actually am. And I'm doing everything I can to stay healthy, but I'm economically disadvantaged. Which reminds me, James Lucid donated another 400 and saved the day again. Bless his heart. Oh my goodness, bless your heart. And he's gone to war too. He's gone to war. Suggesting climate change, which is actual the cover for radioactive fallout, and you'll see it everywhere you go. Climate change. You go read an article about a pizza, and they'll have climate change in there somewhere. Next time the cops pull you over for speeding, they ask you why you're speeding, and say climate change. They're probably going to let you go. Probably just going to let you go. So all of this stuff I just showed you now got to go into a black hole because we can't keep up with the amount that we haven't covered. But the one thing I like, or dislike sometimes, but like, is the fact that I have a really good memory. I'm cursed with a really good memory. And that's why I don't sleep very good. That's why I have so many fucking nightmares all the time. But it's also the reason why the world has hope, is because we exist and we are not going to be bullied or intimidated or threatened by a bunch of fucking chicken necks in the nuclear industry. You have no idea, you people. You have no idea what's coming for you fuckers. The world is coming for you. I can guarantee it. You think you pulled off the perfect fucking scam of a millennium, but you didn't. You're too incompetent. You're too much of a chicken neck. You're too unlikable people. You're too dishonest and deceptive and deceitful and disingenuous. You have no fucking redeeming qualities whatsoever. You're a scourge on humanity. And humanity will eventually, and now that time has come, will catch up to you. Censor me doesn't mean that the truth is not going to find its way out there. Yeah, thank you everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. I don't know. I'm so busted up now I can barely fucking move. Was the mass species die after a result of Fukushima nuclear fallout contaminating the entire northern hemisphere? Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Let me see what I got here. And I'm going to play another one of James' songs. That's why I play her exclusively, by the way, is songs from James Luce's website. And you can go and check his links, and he's way up there, man. And we're going to play No Bugs on the Glass, which was dedicated to Albert, who used to be here every show for years and years. He's been around since almost the very beginning, and he died last year. He's 74. He's an ex-engineer, a really, really interesting career. I'm very saddened when his wife called me with the news. And so at the end of that video I'm going to play, you're going to see a little picture of Albert, something we've never seen. And he was really something, man. He was really good to everybody in the comments section. He was just super nice people. But he got it. He got it. He got it 100%. And he was a lifelong fighter for us, and we miss him dearly. And hugs for everybody. Have a great night, a great day tomorrow. If you can donate, please go down to my PayPal link and donate. For goodness sakes, stop this madness and help me out and let me get the fucking war. I'm the good guy. You got to realize I'm actually the good guy. If you look at my site, you'll realize that real fucking quick. But if you don't step up, who the fuck else is going to do it? I can only do so much. I need help. People need to help me. You have to fucking help me to enable me to beat the living fucking shit out of this industry. They deserve it. They deserve a bastard like me, using them for a punching bag forever. That's their fucking calling, right? Have a great night. I miss you, Albert. You take care, my friend.
Rolled out of making the sky gone pale, rain on the shield like a soft band-aid. Engine knocked like a bottle on corpses, paint on the blacktop and tires roll. Used to count the guts like ticker tape June. Now the windshield reads like a dead cartoon. No flat, no grit, no tick or drum, just a flickering line in the copper tone. No bugs on the glass, no dance, no sound, no wings like sparks when the sun goes down. Where the dusk once sparked with the firefly rise, now it's guardrails and glass with no trace of flight. Across the savannah, wide and slow, river teeth jagged where it eddies slow. Flowers lean from gravel and shade, but the sky held flat like it never prayed. And maybe it's runoff, maybe it's law, maybe it's fallout nobody saw. Maybe that drift from the muck's melt sway took the color and carried it away. No bugs on the glass, no twitch, no dive, just a freeway breath trying to feel alive. Where swarms once danced in the amber light, now it's guardrails and glass with no trace of flight. I run these lanes through half-left towns, past silos bent, the earth gone brown. No bugs on the glass and none to send, just tires on top.